Hello everyone. Before we start, make sure to like and subscribe to the channel. And leave a comment with where you're from and what time you're watching. That way, YouTube will keep showing you stories just like this one. Now, let's begin. Nobody in my family ever talked about the dead things. That was just how we operated, I guess. I grew up in a small house in rural Ohio, the kind of place where everyone knew everyone and nothing exciting ever happened except for church potlucks and high school football games. My brother Elliot was 4 years older than me, which meant by the time I started kindergarten in 1994, he was already this mysterious figure who spent most of his time in his room or wandering the woods behind our property. Our parents worked long hours at the manufacturing plant 2 towns over, so Elliot and I were often alone together after school. He was quiet, the kind of quiet that adults always mistook for politeness or shyness. Teachers loved him. Neighbors called him such a nice young man. But even as a little girl, something about the way he watched things made me uncomfortable, though I never had the words to explain why. The first pet that died was my hamster, Peanut. I was 7 years old and had only had him for 3 weeks when I found him stiff in his cage one morning. His tiny body contorted in a way that seemed wrong even to my childish eyes. My mother said he probably had a heart attack, that hamsters were fragile creatures. Elliot stood in my doorway while I cried, his face completely blank, and when our mom left the room, he told me he could help me bury Peanut in the backyard. I remember how carefully he handled the small body, how he seemed almost fascinated by the weight of it in his palm. 2 months later, our neighbor's cat went missing. And then it was the Thornton family's dog down the street. People blamed coyotes. Elliot never said anything about any of it, but I noticed he started spending more time in those woods, coming home with dirt under his fingernails and scratches on his forearms that he claimed came from thorny bushes. By the time I reached middle school, I had learned to keep a mental catalog of strange coincidences. Billy Ashworth broke his arm falling off his bike on a route Elliot had suggested as a shortcut. Megan Pryor got food poisoning at a birthday party where Elliot had helped serve cake. A boy named Danny Schultz, who had once made fun of Elliot's second-hand clothes, somehow ended up with a severe allergic reaction during lunch period, even though the school nurse swore there were no peanuts in anything he ate. Each incident had a perfectly reasonable explanation on its own. Accidents happen to kids all the time, my mother would say. But I started noticing how Elliot would ask about these people in the days before something happened to them. Casual questions about their schedules, their habits, what they liked to eat. And afterward, he never seemed surprised. He would just nod slowly when our parents discussed the news at dinner, his fork moving methodically across his plate, his eyes fixed somewhere beyond the kitchen window. The summer I turned 14, old Mr. Callahan, who lived at the end of our road, fell down his basement stairs and broke his hip. He died 3 weeks later from complications, and the whole town showed up to his funeral. I remember standing in the back of the church watching Elliot in the front pew with our parents, his head bowed in what everyone probably assumed was grief or respect. But I had seen him coming out of Mr. Callahan's tool shed 2 days before the fall. When I asked him what he was doing there, he just smiled and said he was returning a wrench our dad had borrowed. The thing is, I knew for a fact our dad never borrowed anything from Mr. Callahan because the two of them had been in some petty argument about property lines for years. I never told anyone about that. I was 14 and part of me still wanted to believe my brother was just weird, not dangerous. That was the lie I told myself for a very long time. Elliot moved out when he turned 18. Right after graduating high school with honors. He got a job at some warehouse a few hours away, and our parents acted like he had gone off to conquer the world. I was secretly relieved when he left. The house felt lighter, if that makes any sense. No more finding dead birds on the back porch that he claimed the cat must have brought in, even though we did not have a cat. No more waking up at 2 in the morning to the sound of the back door closing and wondering where he had been. I threw myself into school, made friends, went to college in Pennsylvania, and built a life that had nothing to do with that little house in Ohio. Elliot and I exchanged maybe 3 phone calls a year, always on holidays, always brief. He sounded normal enough, He told me about jobs, apartments, a girlfriend once. I convinced myself that maybe I had imagined all those childhood suspicions, that maybe I had just been a paranoid kid with an overactive imagination looking for patterns that were not there. Our dad passed away from a heart attack in 2015, and our mom followed him 2 years later after a long fight with cancer. I was the one who handled most of the arrangements because Elliot said he could not get time off work for the funerals. He showed up to our mother's burial for exactly 40 minutes, stood at the edge of the group with sunglasses on even though it was overcast, and left without saying goodbye to anyone. After the estate was settled, the house sat empty for years. I kept paying the property taxes because I could not bring myself to sell it, but I never went back. Then, this past October, I got a letter from the county saying there were code violations that needed to be addressed, something about the roof and overgrown vegetation. I had no choice but to drive out there and assess the damage myself. I wish I had just hired someone to deal with it. I wish I had never stepped foot in that house again. The drive took almost 5 hours, and I arrived just as the sun was starting to set. The house looked smaller than I remembered, sagging under the weight of years of neglect. Paint peeling off the siding in long strips, gutters hanging loose, the front porch steps rotted through in places. I let myself in with the old key that still hung on my keychain after all these years, and the smell hit me immediately. Mildew, dust, and something else underneath it all, something faintly metallic that I could not identify. The furniture was still there, covered in white sheets like ghosts frozen mid-conversation. I walked through the living room, the kitchen, my parents' old bedroom. Everything was exactly as they had left it, preserved in a thick layer of grime. But when I climbed the stairs to the second floor and pushed open the door to Elliot's room, I found something I was not expecting. The room had been cleared out completely, except for a single cardboard box sitting in the middle of the floor. It was not dusty like everything else. Someone had been here recently. I should have left right then. Every instinct I had was screaming at me to get back in my car and drive away, to call a realtor and let them handle everything remotely. But I could not stop myself from opening that box. Inside, there were notebooks, dozens of them, the cheap composition kind with the black and white marbled covers. And underneath the notebooks, there were drawings. I pulled out the first one and my breath caught in my throat. It was a detailed sketch of a cat, anatomically precise. But the cat was cut open, its organs labeled in neat handwriting. There were notes in the margins about which incisions caused the most blood loss, which organs could be removed while the animal was still alive. I flipped through more pages and found dogs, birds, squirrels, all documented the same way. Dates were written at the top of each page. The earliest one I found was from 1991, when Elliot would have been only 9 years old. The notebooks were worse. They were organized by year, each one filled with Elliot's handwriting in blue ink that had faded to gray over time. He had documented everything: names, addresses, daily routines, weaknesses. There were pages dedicated to specific people, our neighbors, classmates, even our own parents. He had noted what time our dad left for work, what medications our mom took, which days I had piano lessons. One entry described in clinical detail how he had loosened the bolts on Mr. Callahan's basement railing, calculating the angle of the fall and the likelihood of serious injury, based on the old man's weight and bone density. Another section chronicled his experiments in the woods, complete with maps showing where he had buried the remains. There was a whole notebook dedicated to something he called reaction studies, where he observed how people behaved when they were afraid or in pain. He had been watching all of us, studying us like specimens, and none of us ever knew. I was still sitting on the floor of his room, surrounded by evidence of my brother's secret life, when I heard a car pull into the driveway. My heart nearly stopped. Through the grimy window, I could see a dark sedan parking behind my car, and a man in a gray suit stepping out. For one terrible moment, I thought it was Elliot, that he had somehow known I would be here. But the man who knocked on the front door identified himself as Detective Paul Harmon from the state police. He was looking for information about my brother. A young woman had gone missing from a town about 60 miles from here, a 23-year-old named Brittany Lowe, who had vanished from her apartment 3 weeks ago without a trace. Elliot's name had come up during the investigation. They had found his fingerprints on her mailbox, and a neighbor had seen someone matching his description watching her building on multiple occasions in the weeks before she disappeared. The detective asked me when I had last spoken to my brother, and I realized I could not remember. It had been at least 2 years, maybe longer. I showed Detective Harmon everything I had found. He called in a forensic team that same night, and they spent hours photographing the notebooks, bagging the drawings, searching the woods behind the house with flashlights and cadaver dogs. They found bones out there, animal bones mostly, but also some fragments that would need further testing. The detective sat with me in the kitchen while his team worked, asking me questions about our childhood, about Elliot's behavior, about the accidents I had always suspected but never reported. I told him everything, every strange coincidence, every uneasy feeling, every time I had looked at my brother and seen something hollow behind his eyes. When I finished, Detective Harmon was quiet for a long moment. Then he told me that Brittany Lowe was not the first. There had been other disappearances over the years in towns where Elliot had lived or worked, young women who had vanished without explanation. The police had never been able to connect them until now, until his fingerprints showed up on that mailbox, and a pattern finally emerged from the chaos. I gave the detective my contact information and agreed to cooperate fully with the investigation. Before he left, he asked me one more question that has haunted me ever since. He wanted to know if Elliot had ever shown any particular interest in me, if he had ever made me feel unsafe. I thought about all those years growing up in that house, the way Elliot would sometimes stand in my doorway at night without saying anything, the detailed notes about my piano schedule in his notebooks, and I realized something that made my entire body go cold. In all those pages, all those observations about neighbors and classmates and strangers, there was one person he had documented more thoroughly than anyone else. Me. My habits, my friends, my fears, the route I took to school, the window I always left cracked open at night because I liked the fresh air. The last entry about me was dated just 6 months ago, long after I had moved away, long after I thought I had escaped. He had written my current address in Pennsylvania, the name of the coffee shop where I stop every morning, and a single sentence at the bottom of the page: "She always knew. She will have to be dealt with eventually." That was 3 months ago. I do not live in Pennsylvania anymore. I sold my apartment, quit my job, and moved to a different state where I am staying with a friend whose address is not connected to my name in any way. I changed my phone number, deleted all my social media accounts, and bought a handgun that I keep in my nightstand drawer. Detective Harmon calls me every few weeks to update me on the investigation, but there is not much to report. Elliot has vanished. His last known apartment was cleared out, his bank accounts emptied, his car abandoned in a parking lot near the West Virginia border. They found Brittany Lowe's body in November, buried in a shallow grave about 20 miles from where she lived. The forensic evidence matched what the police found in those woods behind our childhood home. There is now a warrant out for my brother's arrest on multiple counts of murder, but nobody knows where he is. He could be anywhere. He could be watching someone else right now, taking notes, learning their routines, waiting for the right moment. I am sharing this because I need people to understand something. The monsters we fear are not hiding under our beds or lurking in abandoned buildings. They sit across from us at dinner tables. They attend our birthday parties and our funerals. They smile at us and ask about our day, and nobody ever suspects because they have spent their whole lives learning how to seem normal. If you have a feeling about someone, a persistent unease that you cannot explain, do not ignore it. Do not convince yourself that you are being paranoid or unfair. I spent my entire childhood watching my brother hurt things and people, and I never said a word because I wanted to believe I was wrong. I will carry that guilt for the rest of my life. Elliot is still out there somewhere, and I know he has not forgotten about me. Every time I hear a noise at night, every time I notice a car parked too long on my street, every time I feel like someone is watching me, I wonder if today is the day he finally comes to finish what he started. I do not know how this story ends. I just know that I refuse to be another name in one of his notebooks. Sometimes I think about how close I came to dying on a random Wednesday in October of 2017, and it still makes my chest tight. My sister had just given birth to her first baby in Phoenix, and since I lived in Albuquerque at the time, I decided to make the 6-hour drive instead of dealing with flight delays and rental cars. I had turned 34 that spring, finally stable in my nursing career after years of bouncing between hospitals, and the road trip felt like a good chance to decompress before meeting my nephew. I left work around 7 in the evening, figuring I could drive through the night and arrive by early morning. My Subaru Outback had just passed inspection. I had a full tank of gas, a podcast queue loaded up, and a large coffee from the hospital cafeteria. Everything felt normal. Everything felt safe. I remember thinking how much I loved night driving on empty highways, the way the world shrinks down to just your headlights and the white lines disappearing beneath your wheels. Around midnight, I was somewhere between Socorro and Truth or Consequences on Interstate 25, surrounded by absolute darkness. New Mexico desert at night is a different kind of lonely. No streetlights, no houses, just the occasional pair of headlights passing in the opposite direction. I had been driving for nearly 5 hours and my bladder was protesting. Plus, I wanted to stretch my legs and grab another coffee or an energy drink. When I saw the glow of a gas station sign rising up from the flatness ahead, I felt relieved. It was one of those small, independent stations, not a big chain with harsh fluorescent lights that made everything look slightly yellow and washed out. There were only 2 other cars in the parking lot, a beat-up pickup truck near the air pump, and a dark sedan parked at an odd angle near the side of the building. I pulled up to a pump closest to the store entrance, not really thinking about positioning, just eager to use the restroom. The store inside was small and cramped, shelves packed too tightly together with that random assortment you find at rural gas stations. Motor oil next to bags of chips, dusty stuffed animals hanging from a rack near the register. An older woman sat behind the counter, maybe in her 60s, with reading glasses pushed up on her forehead and a paperback novel open in front of her. She barely looked up when I asked for the restroom key, just pointed toward a door at the back with a wooden paddle attached to a set of keys. The bathroom was exactly what you would expect. Flickering light, cracked mirror, that specific industrial soap smell mixed with something vaguely sour. I did my business quickly, washed my hands and avoided looking too closely at anything. When I came back out, I grabbed an energy drink from the cooler and a pack of peanut butter crackers, paid with my card, and exchanged maybe 3 words with the woman at the register. She seemed tired, disinterested, and I did not blame her for working the graveyard shift in the middle of nowhere. I pushed through the glass door back into the night air, which had gotten colder while I was inside. That high desert chill cuts right through you once the sun goes down, and I remember pulling my jacket tighter as I walked toward my car. That is when I noticed him. A man was standing near the back of my Subaru, crouched down slightly like he was examining something. He was average height, maybe late 40s, wearing a denim jacket and a baseball cap pulled low. Nothing about him screamed danger. He looked like any guy you might see at a hardware store on a Saturday morning. When he saw me approaching, he straightened up and smiled. It was a friendly smile, the kind that crinkles the eyes, and he raised one hand in a little wave. My first instinct was not fear, but mild confusion. I thought maybe he had accidentally bumped my car or was checking if he knew me from somewhere. People are friendly in small towns, and this felt like that kind of place. "Hey there," he said, his voice casual and warm. "I noticed you got a flat tire on your back passenger side. Looks pretty bad, actually. You probably did not even feel it go, but you definitely should not be driving on that." He gestured toward the rear of my car with a concerned expression. I blinked at him, surprised, and walked around to look. In the dim light from the station, the tire did look a little low, but nothing dramatic. I had checked my tires before leaving Albuquerque. It was something my dad drilled into me years ago, and they had all been fine. I said something like, "Oh, really? It looks okay to me." He shook his head slowly, the way someone does when they are trying to be patient with you. "Trust me, I have been working on cars my whole life. That thing is going to blow out on you within 10 miles, guaranteed. You do not want to be stranded out here in the middle of the night. I got a jack in my truck. I can change it for you real quick." He pointed toward the beat-up pickup I had noticed earlier. Something in my gut tightened. It was not a dramatic alarm bell, just a quiet discomfort that I could not name. Here was this seemingly helpful stranger offering to fix a problem I did not know I had, and logically, I should have been grateful. But there was something about the way he had positioned himself, the way he seemed too eager, too insistent. I noticed his eyes kept flicking toward the dark sedan parked on the side of the building, like he was checking something. And the more I looked at my tire, the more it seemed fine. Maybe slightly lower than the others, but nothing that would cause a blowout. I thought about all the true crime podcasts I had listened to on long drives, all the stories about women who ignored their instincts because they did not want to seem rude or paranoid. My mother always told me that politeness had gotten more women killed than anything else. I made a decision in that moment that probably saved my life. "You know what? I really appreciate the offer," I said, keeping my voice light and friendly even though my heart was starting to beat faster. "But my brother-in-law is a mechanic, and he is meeting me in about 20 minutes just up the road. He can take a look at it if there is a problem." It was a complete lie. My brother-in-law sold insurance and could barely change a light bulb, but it came out smoothly, like I had rehearsed it. The man's expression shifted just for a second. His smile stayed in place, but something behind his eyes changed. It was like watching a mask slip and then get readjusted so quickly you almost convince yourself you imagined it. 20 minutes, huh? That is a long way to drive on a bad tire. You could have a blowout, roll your car. I have seen it happen." His voice had an edge now, a hint of frustration underneath the helpful tone. He took a step toward me, and I instinctively stepped back toward my driver's side door. "I really think you should let me take a look. It will only take a few minutes." I shook my head and pulled my keys from my jacket pocket, pressing the unlock button even though the doors were already unlocked. I just wanted him to hear the beep, to know I was ready to leave. "I will be fine, but thank you so much for the concern. Have a good night." I moved quickly around to the driver's side, not quite running but not walking casually either. As I opened the door, I glanced back at him one more time. He was standing exactly where I had left him, watching me with an expression I still cannot fully describe. It was not angry, not exactly. It was more like disappointment mixed with something calculating, like a predator watching prey slip away and already thinking about the next opportunity. I got into my car, locked the doors immediately, and started the engine. My hands were steady, but inside I was trembling. I pulled out of that parking lot faster than I should have, gravel spraying behind me as I turned back onto the interstate. In my rearview mirror, I saw him still standing there under the fluorescent lights, getting smaller and smaller until the darkness swallowed him completely. I drove for about 45 minutes without stopping, my eyes constantly checking the mirrors for any headlights that might be following me. Every time a car appeared behind me, my heart would race until it either passed or turned off onto another road. The tire seemed fine, no wobbling, no strange sounds, nothing that indicated any problem at all. I started to second-guess myself, wondering if I had been paranoid, if that man really was just a helpful stranger and I had been rude for no reason. But then I would remember that look in his eyes, the way his demeanor changed when I declined his help, and I knew I had made the right call. When I finally reached Las Cruces around 1:30 in the morning, I pulled into a well-lit truck stop that was busy with travelers and long-haul drivers. I parked under a bright light near the entrance and just sat there for a few minutes, letting my breathing slow down. I thought about calling my sister, but I did not want to worry her when she had just given birth. I thought about calling the police, but what would I even say? A man offered to help me with my tire, and I said no. I checked into a motel in Las Cruces instead of continuing to Phoenix. I was too shaken to keep driving, and the exhaustion had caught up with me in a way that felt dangerous. The room was basic but clean, and I triple-checked the lock on the door before collapsing onto the bed fully clothed. Sleep came in fits and starts, interrupted by dreams I cannot remember but that left me waking up with my heart pounding. When morning finally came, pale light filtering through the cheap curtains, I felt ridiculous. In the daylight, the whole encounter seemed less sinister. I convinced myself that I had overreacted, that he was probably just some lonely guy who wanted to feel useful, and I had been rude to him for no real reason. I took a shower, grabbed breakfast at a diner attached to the motel, and checked my phone while I ate. That is when I saw the news alert that changed everything. A man had been arrested at a gas station on Interstate 25, just south of Socorro. The article said he was wanted in connection with the disappearances of at least 4 women over the past 3 years, all of them traveling alone on remote highways in New Mexico and Arizona. His method was always the same. He would puncture their tires while they were inside paying or using the restroom, then approach them as a helpful stranger, offering to fix the problem. The women who accepted his help were never seen alive again. Police had found remains on a property he owned about 60 miles from the interstate, buried in shallow graves in the desert. His name was printed in the article, but I do not remember it now. My brain just refused to hold on to it. What I do remember is the photo they included. It was a mugshot, his face lit by harsh institutional lighting, and even though he was not smiling anymore, I recognized him instantly. The denim jacket, the shape of his jaw, the way his eyes looked flat and empty without that friendly mask he wore. It was him. It was the man from the gas station. I dropped my phone onto the table and had to grip the edge to keep myself upright. The waitress asked if I was okay, and I could not even answer her. I just sat there, staring at nothing, trying to process the fact that I had been standing 3 feet away from a serial killer less than 12 hours ago. He had touched my car. He had looked me in the eyes and smiled. The article said he was arrested around 4 in the morning, which meant he was still at that gas station for hours after I left, probably waiting for another woman to pull in alone. I thought about the dark sedan parked on the side of the building and wondered if there had been someone else in it, if he worked with a partner, if I had been even closer to danger than I realized. I called my sister and told her I would be late, that something had happened and I needed to take care of something first. Then I called the New Mexico State Police. A detective drove down from Socorro to meet me in Las Cruces that afternoon. Her name was Gutierrez, and she had a calm, steady presence that helped me keep it together while I gave my statement. I told her everything, the time I arrived, what he said, how he acted, the dark sedan, all of it. She took notes without interrupting, nodding occasionally, and when I finished, she asked if I would consent to having my car examined by their forensic team. I said yes without hesitation. They found the puncture within minutes. It was a small, clean hole in the sidewall of my back passenger tire, made by something sharp and narrow, probably an awl or an ice pick. The forensic tech said it was designed to cause a slow leak, the kind that would not be immediately noticeable, but would leave me stranded within 20 or 30 miles. Detective Gutierrez told me later that they found the same tool in his truck, along with zip ties, duct tape, and a hunting knife with a serrated edge. She did not tell me what else they found in his truck, and I did not ask. Some things I do not need to know. I made it to Phoenix 2 days later, and finally held my nephew for the first time. He was so small, so completely unaware of anything beyond warmth and milk and sleep, and I remember crying while I held him in a way that confused my sister until I explained what had happened. She held me while I sobbed, and we stayed up most of that night talking about nothing and everything, the way sisters do when one of them has brushed up against something terrible. I still think about that night at the gas station more often than I would like to admit. Sometimes I wonder about the women who were not as lucky as me, who said yes when he offered to help, who got into his truck, or let him follow them to a quiet spot on the side of the road. I wonder if they had the same instinct I did and ignored it, or if they never felt anything wrong at all. Do not have nightmares about him anymore, but every time I stop at a gas station after dark, I check my tires before I go inside and again when I come out. I watch the parking lot. I keep my keys in my hand. And I never ever ignore that quiet voice in my gut that tells me something is not right, even when I cannot explain why. That voice is the only reason I am still here to tell this story. Moving into that cramped apartment on Riverside Drive felt like a victory after my divorce finalized, 37 and rebuilding from scratch. But at least I had my own space again. The building was nothing special, just 6 units spread across 3 floors, with paper-thin walls and a radiator that clanged like it was trying to communicate in Morse code. Most tenants kept to themselves, which suited me fine since I was pulling double shifts at the warehouse and barely had energy for small talk anyway. The only person I really knew was Mrs. Paulson from downstairs, who left homemade cookies outside my door every Sunday and always asked if I was eating enough. The unit directly across from mine, 3B, had been occupied since before I moved in. But in 4 months, I'd only glimpsed the tenant twice, both times around 3 in the morning when I was stumbling to the bathroom and caught him hauling black garbage bags down the hallway. Those bags stuck with me in a way I couldn't quite explain, the way he gripped them with both hands, leaning backward like he was dragging something impossibly dense. Normal garbage doesn't make a person's neck veins bulge like that. Doesn't require shuffling sideways down the corridor to manage the weight. The first time I saw him, a tall guy with thinning hair and shoulders that seemed too broad for his narrow frame, I figured maybe he was disposing of old books or dumping cat litter from multiple boxes all at once. The second time, about 3 weeks later, same scenario. Dead of night, same type of bags, same labored movements. Except this time there was a wet sound as he dragged them past my door, like something inside had leaked and was creating suction against the plastic. He must have noticed my door was cracked because he stopped, turned his head just enough that I could see his profile in the dim hallway light, and stood there for maybe 10 seconds before continuing toward the stairwell. Everything changed on a Thursday night in early October when I got home from my shift and found the hallway reeking of bleach mixed with something else. Something metallic and wrong that made my sinuses burn. The smell was coming from the ventilation grate between our doors, so strong it made my eyes water as I fumbled with my keys. I could hear sounds from inside 3B, a rhythmic scraping, like someone was dragging furniture across the floor in the same pattern over and over, accompanied by the occasional thud of something heavy dropping. For 20 minutes I sat on my couch, listening to that scraping through the shared wall, trying to convince myself it was just someone doing a deep clean or maybe refinishing their floors. But when the scraping stopped, I heard water running for what must have been 2 hours straight, the pipes in the walls groaning from the constant flow, and then silence so complete it felt like the apartment next door had become a vacuum. The next morning I caught our building manager, Eugene, near the mailboxes and mentioned the smell and the noise, trying to keep my tone casual like I was just making conversation. Eugene, a stocky guy who always wore the same paint-stained coveralls, barely looked up from sorting through a stack of late rent notices and mumbled something about how the tenant in 3B had informed him about doing some deep cleaning, dealing with a roach problem that required heavy-duty chemicals. That explanation might have satisfied me if I hadn't noticed the rust-colored stain seeping under the door of 3B later that afternoon, a thin line of reddish-brown liquid that had dried into a crust along the threshold. When I bent down to look closer, that metallic smell hit me again, stronger than the bleach, and I recognized it then. It was the same smell from the butcher shop where my dad used to work when I was a kid, that iron-heavy scent of blood that never quite washes out. I started paying attention after that, maybe more than I should have, keeping track of every sound that came through those walls. The guy in 3B kept bizarre hours. I'd hear his door open and close at 2, 3, 4 in the morning, always followed by those careful footsteps heading toward the stairwell. Sometimes I'd peek through my peephole when I heard him coming, watching as he emerged with another black bag, always holding it the same way, always moving with that same strained gait. Once, the bag had a tear in it, and something dark dripped onto the hallway carpet, leaving a trail of spots that were gone by morning, scrubbed away before anyone else would notice. I started a notebook, writing down dates and times like some kind of amateur detective, telling myself I was being paranoid while simultaneously unable to stop documenting every strange occurrence. October 10th, 3:15 a.m., heavy bags again. October 13th, chemical smell so strong I had to open all my windows. October 15th, found what looked like a fingernail in the hallway, but convinced myself it was just a piece of plastic. By the 3rd week of October, I wasn't sleeping well anymore, jumping at every sound from next door, double-checking my locks whenever I heard his door open. Mrs. Paulson mentioned she'd been having nightmares, said the whole building felt different lately, like something bad had seeped into the walls. I wanted to tell her about my suspicions, but how do you explain to a 70-year-old woman that you think your neighbor might be doing something terrible without sounding completely unhinged? Instead, I went back to Eugene with more concerns, showed him photos I'd taken of the stains in the hallway, pointed out the frequency of the late-night activity. Eugene looked at me like I was wasting his time, said the tenant in 3B had never missed rent, never had any official complaints, and suggested maybe I should mind my own business if I wanted to keep enjoying the below-market rent we were all getting. That night around midnight, I heard footsteps stop right outside my door. No movement, just someone standing there breathing. And when I looked through the peephole, I saw the back of a head, like whoever it was had their face pressed against my door. I stayed frozen at that peephole for 5 minutes, watching that head remain perfectly still against my door, until finally the person stepped back, and I saw it was him, the tenant from 3B, just standing in the hallway staring at my door with this blank expression, his hands hanging at his sides. He stood there for another minute before turning and walking back to his apartment, closing the door with a soft click that somehow sounded more menacing than if he'd slammed it. Sleep was impossible after that, so I sat in my living room with a baseball bat across my lap, listening to the sounds coming through the wall. More scraping, more water running, and occasionally what sounded like a power tool, maybe a saw or a drill, running in short bursts. Around 4 in the morning, I heard his door open again, heard those familiar dragging sounds, and this time I forced myself to crack my door and watch as he hauled 2 bags toward the stairs, his face flushed with exertion, sweat staining the collar of his shirt. He glanced back once, caught me watching, and gave me this small nod, like we were just 2 neighbors acknowledging each other during a bout of insomnia. But his eyes stayed on mine a beat too long, cold and calculating. I called in sick to work the next day and drove to the police station, bringing my notebook and the photos on my phone, laying everything out for a bored-looking desk sergeant who typed up my statement with 2 fingers while yawning. He said they'd send someone to do a wellness check, standard procedure, but his tone suggested this would be filed away and forgotten like every other paranoid neighbor complaint they received. 3 days passed with no follow-up, and I was starting to think I'd have to move out, break my lease, and just eat the cost, when I noticed something that made my decision for me. Coming home from a late shift, I found my doormat had been moved, shifted just a few inches to the left, and underneath it was a single key, a copy of my apartment key, one I definitely hadn't lost or given to anyone. The only way someone could have gotten it was if they'd made an impression when I wasn't home, which meant he'd been in my apartment, going through my things, maybe standing in my bedroom while I was at work. I packed a bag that night, threw together enough clothes for a week, and went to stay at a motel near the interstate, one of those places that accepts cash and doesn't ask questions. For 2 weeks, I lived out of that dingy room, only returning to the apartment building during daylight hours to grab mail and more clothes, always checking the hallway before stepping out of the stairwell. Mrs. Paulson called me twice, worried because she hadn't seen me, and I made up some story about visiting family out of state, not wanting to frighten her with my suspicions. During those 2 weeks at the motel, I kept calling the police station, asking about the wellness check, getting transferred between departments until someone finally told me they'd knocked on the door of 3B. No one had answered, and without probable cause, that was all they could do. I even tried calling the FBI tip line, feeling ridiculous as I explained my concerns to an agent who politely took down the information and said they'd look into it if anything matched their existing cases. On a Monday morning in early November, my phone rang at 6:30. It was Eugene, his voice shaking, telling me to come to the building immediately but not to go inside, just wait in the parking lot. When I arrived, the entire block was cordoned off with yellow tape. Police cars everywhere, officers in tactical gear moving in and out of the building. A detective named Gillespie pulled me aside, showed me his badge and started asking questions about the tenant in 3B. When had I last seen him? Had I noticed anything unusual? Did I have any interaction with him? I handed over my notebook, showed him all the photos on my phone, and watched his expression change from professional detachment to genuine concern as he flipped through the pages. He stepped away to make a phone call, and when he came back, he told me they'd been tracking this man for 3 years across 4 states, that he was wanted in connection with at least 11 disappearances, and my reports had helped them finally pinpoint his location after he'd made a mistake disposing of evidence in a dumpster 2 blocks away. They kept us out of the building for 3 days while the forensics team worked, and when they finally let me back in to collect my belongings, the door to 3B was sealed with evidence tape, and the smell of chemicals was overwhelming. Detective Gillespie walked me to my apartment, waited while I packed everything I owned into boxes, and then dropped something that made my knees buckle. They'd found my spare key in the suspect's apartment, along with photos of me coming and going, dates and times matching my work schedule perfectly. The killer, whose real name was Theodore Marsh, had been studying me for months, had made notes about my routines, my habits, even recorded conversations through the thin walls. In his notebook, which Gillespie let me glimpse briefly, there was a page dedicated to me with a single word circled multiple times: later. The detective explained that Marsh had a pattern of selecting victims from his immediate environment, but would sometimes identify what he called future projects, people he planned to revisit after establishing himself somewhere new. The trial made national news. Theodore Marsh, the maintenance man killer as the media dubbed him, because he often took apartment maintenance jobs to gain access to victims. They found remains of 7 people in various states of decomposition inside the apartment walls, hidden behind false panels he'd constructed himself. I had to testify about what I'd observed, sitting in that courtroom while he stared at me with the same blank expression I'd seen that night at my door. He got multiple life sentences without possibility of parole, shipped off to a maximum security facility in another state. I never went back to that apartment building, couldn't even drive down that street for years afterward. Eugene sent me a check for my security deposit with a note apologizing for not taking my concerns seriously. Mrs. Paulson moved in with her daughter in Phoenix. The building was eventually demolished, turned into a parking lot for a new grocery store. Sometimes I drive by that parking lot, and I think about how close I came to being one of those remains in the walls, just another missing person case that might never have been solved if I hadn't trusted my instincts and gotten out when I did. When I signed the lease for that studio apartment in Denver, I cried in the leasing office. The property manager, this kind older woman named Beverly, thought something was wrong, but I told her they were happy tears. And they were. After 2.5 years of walking on eggshells, of having my phone checked daily, of being told who I could talk to and where I could go, I was finally signing something that was mine alone. No shared lease, no boyfriend's name anywhere on the paperwork. Just mine. I'd saved up for 8 months while working double shifts at the diner, hiding cash in a tampon box because I knew he'd never look there. The apartment was tiny, just 400 square feet on the 3rd floor of a converted warehouse building, but it had tall windows that let in actual sunlight, and a door that locked from the inside with a deadbolt I could control. I changed my number the day I moved in, blocked him on everything, and told exactly 3 people where I was going: my sister in Minnesota, my best friend from high school, and my manager at the new restaurant job I'd lined up. I didn't post about the move, didn't update my location, didn't leave a forwarding address at the post office. For the first month, I barely slept. Every footstep in the hallway made me jump. Every time my phone buzzed, even though it was a new number, my heart would slam against my ribs. But as April turned into May, and May crawled into early July, something strange happened. I started to relax. I'd wake up in the morning and make coffee without wondering if I'd brewed it wrong. I'd wear whatever I wanted without calculating whether it would start a fight. I made friends with my neighbor across the hall, this nurse named Felicity, who worked night shifts and would sometimes knock on my door at 7 in the morning to share leftover Thai food. I started taking a different route home from work each week, not out of fear anymore, but because I could. Because nobody was timing me or questioning why I was 12 minutes late. I even went on a date in late July, nothing serious, just drinks with a guy I met at a bookstore. Didn't go anywhere, but I realized halfway through that I wasn't scared anymore. I wasn't looking at the door every 5 minutes. I wasn't making excuses to leave early. I was just living, like a normal person, and it felt like learning to breathe again after holding my breath underwater for years. The first package arrived on a Wednesday in mid-July. I came home from my shift around 10 at night, exhausted and smelling like fryer grease, and there it was sitting outside my door. A small cardboard box, maybe the size of a shoebox, with my name written on it in black marker. No return address, no shipping label, just my name and apartment number written in this careful, blocky handwriting that made my stomach twist before my brain could catch up to why. I brought it inside and stared at it for 20 minutes before opening it. Inside was a snow globe, the cheap kind you get at tourist shops, with a tiny plastic diner inside and fake snow that swirled when you shook it. We'd bought one exactly like it on a road trip to Colorado Springs 2 years earlier, back when I still thought his jealousy was just him caring too much. He'd dropped it in a gas station parking lot a week later during a fight about me smiling at the cashier, and it had shattered all over the asphalt. I'd never mentioned that snow globe to anyone, never posted about it. It was such a small, forgettable moment in a relationship full of bigger, worse moments. But here it was, sitting on my kitchen counter, the fake snow settling around that stupid little diner, and I knew he'd found me. I didn't sleep that night. I sat on my couch with every light on, holding my phone, trying to convince myself it was a coincidence. Maybe he'd sent it to my old address and somehow it got forwarded. Maybe I'd mentioned it to someone and forgotten. But the next morning, when I checked my Instagram, there were 3 failed login attempts between 2 and 4 in the morning. Then I checked my email. 2 more attempts. My Facebook, which I barely used anymore, had been locked due to suspicious activity. I changed all my passwords, enabled every security feature I could find, and told myself it was just random hackers, that this happened to everyone. The second package arrived 5 days later. This time it was a book, a paperback copy of this obscure mystery novel I'd been reading the week before I left him. I'd left my copy behind when I moved, left everything behind except my clothes and documents and the cash I'd saved. The book was dog-eared on page 147, the exact page I'd been on. Written in pencil in the margin was a single word in his handwriting: finish. I dropped it on the floor, my whole body trembling. I picked it up, shoved it in a trash bag, and took it directly to the dumpster outside. Then I called the police. The officer who came was polite, took notes, and told me there wasn't much they could do. I sat across from him at my tiny kitchen table, showing him the login attempts on my phone, explaining about the snow globe I'd already thrown away like an idiot, telling him about my ex, about the 2 years of control and manipulation, and the way he'd punched a hole in the wall 3 inches from my head the night I finally decided to leave. The officer nodded sympathetically and asked if I had proof that my ex had sent the packages. I didn't. No cameras in my hallway, no return address, no fingerprints I could magically produce. He asked if my ex had made any direct threats. I said no, not exactly, not in writing, not in any way I could prove. He explained that without evidence of a direct threat or violation of a restraining order I didn't have, there wasn't much they could pursue. He suggested I document everything, maybe look into getting a protective order, and call again if anything escalated. He gave me a case number and left. I stood in my doorway watching him walk down the stairs, and I felt more alone than I had the entire time I was with Nathan. At least back then, I knew where the danger was sleeping. Now it could be anywhere, watching, waiting, and nobody seemed to think that was enough of a problem to do anything about. I started documenting everything obsessively. I bought a cheap notebook from the dollar store and wrote down every login attempt. Every time I felt like someone was watching me, every car that seemed to idle too long in the parking lot. I asked Beverly if the building could install cameras in the hallways, and she said she'd bring it up with the owners but couldn't promise anything. Felicity noticed something was wrong, and when I finally told her the short version, she started walking me to my car after her night shifts ended. I changed my route home from work again, varying my schedule, never leaving at the same time twice. The third package came on a Friday, exactly 1 week after the second. This one was a photograph, printed on glossy paper, tucked inside a plain manila envelope. It was a picture of me walking into my apartment building, taken from across the street. I was wearing the blue sweater I'd bought 2 weeks earlier, the one I'd picked specifically because Nathan hated the color blue on me, said it made me look washed out. On the back of the photo, in that same careful handwriting, he'd written, "Blue looks good on you now, you've changed." I threw up in my kitchen sink. Then I called the police again. And again, they took notes. And again, nothing happened. The weeks that followed were a blur of paranoia and exhaustion. I stopped sleeping more than 3 or 4 hours a night, always jerking awake at the smallest sound. I started noticing things that might have been nothing, or might have been everything. A man in a baseball cap browsing the same aisle as me at the grocery store 2 days in a row. A silver sedan parked in the lot behind my building that I didn't recognize. My mail arriving already opened, then resealed with tape that didn't match the postal services. I reported everything, built a file so thick it could have been a novel, and still the answer was always the same. Without direct contact, without an explicit threat, without him physically touching me, there was nothing they could do. I started sleeping with a knife under my pillow, then moved it to the nightstand because I kept having dreams where I accidentally cut myself. I put a chair under my doorknob every night like I'd seen in movies. I stopped going anywhere alone after dark. My manager at the restaurant started asking if I was okay, if I needed fewer shifts. And I almost laughed because fewer shifts meant less money, meant losing this apartment, meant going back to nothing. I couldn't afford to fall apart. I couldn't afford to let him win. But every morning I woke up feeling like I'd already lost something I couldn't name. Then came the Monday that changed everything. I got home from a double shift around 11 at night, bone-tired and thinking about nothing except taking a shower and collapsing into bed. The hallway was quiet, most of my neighbors already asleep, and I almost didn't notice it at first. But something made me look down as I reached for my keys, and there it was, a folded piece of paper tucked under my welcome mat, just the corner sticking out, easy to miss if you weren't paying attention. I pulled it out with numb fingers and unfolded it right there in the hallway, too exhausted to be careful, too worn down to take it inside first. The handwriting was his. I'd seen it 1,000 times on grocery lists, on passive-aggressive notes left on the fridge, on the card he'd given me for our first anniversary that I'd stupidly kept for months. The note said, "I'm proud of the life you built. The apartment is nice. Felicity seems like a good friend. I chose a good place for you to start over." I read it 3 times before the words actually registered. He knew about Felicity. He knew her name. He'd been close enough to learn the name of my neighbor, which meant he'd been close enough to hear us talking, or to read her name off her mailbox, or to watch us walking together to the parking lot at dawn. I ran inside, locked every lock, shoved the chair under the door, and sat on the floor with my back against the wall, clutching my phone, unable to move for what felt like hours. The next morning, I went straight to Beverly's office before my shift. I must have looked insane, dark circles under my eyes, still wearing yesterday's clothes, clutching that note in a plastic bag like it was evidence in a crime show. I told her everything, every detail I'd been too embarrassed or too scared to share before. She listened without interrupting, and when I finished, she picked up her phone and called the building's owner directly. Within 2 hours, I was sitting in a small security office in the basement I hadn't even known existed, watching footage from the parking garage cameras with Beverly and a guy named Jerome, who handled maintenance and apparently also monitored the limited security system. We started with footage from the night before, around the time I would have gotten home, and worked backward. It took almost 40 minutes of scrubbing through grainy black and white footage before Jerome suddenly leaned forward and said, "Wait, go back." Beverly rewound the tape, and there he was. Nathan walking calmly through the parking garage at 6 in the morning 3 days earlier, wearing a maintenance uniform I didn't recognize. He had a key card. He swiped it like he belonged there, like he'd done it 100 times before, and the door to the stairwell clicked open without hesitation. My throat closed up so tight I couldn't breathe. Beverly asked me if I was sure it was him, and I couldn't even answer. Just nodded because I would recognize the way he walked in my sleep, that confident stride he used when he thought he was getting away with something. Jerome pulled up the tenant registry while Beverly kept rewinding through older footage. It didn't take long to find what we were looking for. 6 weeks earlier, almost exactly 2 weeks after I'd moved in, someone named Neil Travers had signed a lease for a studio apartment on the first floor. The signature was different, messier than Nathan's usual handwriting, but the emergency contact phone number listed on the application was 1 digit off from Nathan's mother's landline, a number I'd called dozens of times back when I still thought I might eventually be part of his family. Jerome pulled up more footage, and we watched Nathan, or Neil, coming and going at odd hours, always between 5 and 7 in the morning, always returning late at night. He'd been living in the same building as me for over a month, 40 feet below my apartment, using a fake name, paying rent, receiving mail, blending in like any other tenant. In one clip, I watched myself walk past him in the lobby. I didn't even glance in his direction. He was wearing sunglasses and a baseball cap, and I was looking at my phone, completely unaware that the person I'd spent 8 months hiding from was standing close enough to touch me. Beverly's hand found mine and squeezed, and I realized I was crying. These awful silent tears streaming down my face while I watched myself almost die without knowing it. This time, when I called the police, I had evidence. I had footage of him entering the building with a stolen keycard. I had a lease application with a fake name and a traceable phone number. I had 6 weeks of recorded comings and goings that matched the timeline of every package, every login attempt, every moment I'd felt watched. 2 officers came within the hour, and Beverly handed over copies of everything. They ran the name Neil Travers and found nothing, which was enough to justify a welfare check on the apartment. I waited upstairs with Felicity, who'd called in sick to work the moment I told her what was happening, holding my hand so tight her knuckles went white. The knock on his door came at 2 in the afternoon. I know because I was watching the clock, counting every second, convinced he'd somehow slipped away, that he'd seen the police coming and vanished like smoke. But he hadn't. He opened the door in sweatpants and a t-shirt, looking confused, looking innocent, and the officers asked him to confirm his identity. According to the report I read later, he kept up the act for almost 15 minutes before they showed him the footage of me walking past him in the lobby. Something in his face shifted then, they said. He stopped pretending and started explaining. He told them he just wanted to make sure I was safe, that he loved me too much to let me disappear, that he'd been waiting for the right moment to talk to me, to fix what I'd broken when I left without saying goodbye. They found a notebook in his apartment filled with my schedule, my shifts at the restaurant, the times Felicity and I went for coffee, the license plate of the car I'd bought used 3 weeks after moving. He'd been building a complete map of my life, waiting for the moment I'd be alone long enough for him to approach me. The arresting officer told me later that in his 20 years on the job, he'd never seen documentation that thorough. Nathan was charged with stalking, identity fraud, and criminal trespassing. The trial took 8 months, and I had to testify twice, had to sit in a courtroom and look at him while lawyers picked apart every detail of our relationship. He got 4 years, which his attorney tried to reduce to 2 with good behavior. But the judge saw the notebook and the footage and the pattern, and she gave him the maximum sentence allowed under Colorado law. I moved out of that apartment 3 days after his arrest, stayed with my sister in Minnesota until the trial was over, then relocated somewhere I'm not going to name because I've learned the hard way that safety isn't something you can take for granted. It's been almost 2 years now, and I still check the locks 3 times before bed. I still vary my route home. I still feel my heart jump when I see a silver sedan or a man in a baseball cap. But I also sleep through the night most weeks. I have a job I like and friends who know my real name, and a small apartment with a security system I paid for myself. Sometimes I think about that note he left under my welcome mat, about him saying he chose a good place for me to start over. He didn't choose anything for me. I chose it. I chose to leave. I chose to rebuild. And when he tried to take that from me, I chose to fight back. That's the part I hold on to when the fear creeps in. He's in a cell somewhere, and I'm here, free. Writing this down so that maybe someone else who's going through something similar knows that the system doesn't always fail you. Sometimes, if you document everything and don't give up, you get to be the one who walks away. My father died on a Saturday morning in March 2023, and I remember thinking that the timing seemed almost deliberate, like he had chosen the quietest possible moment to slip away. He was 74 years old, had been fighting lung cancer for almost 2 years, and the hospice nurse told us he went peacefully in his sleep at the house in rural Montana, where he had lived for the past 4 decades. I drove up from Denver that same afternoon, a 6-hour trip through mountain roads that I had made dozens of times before, but never under circumstances like these. My sister Corinne met me at the driveway, her eyes red and puffy, and we stood there hugging in the cold spring air while the sun set behind the pines. Our mother had passed away when we were kids, so it was just the two of us now, the last of the Pruitt family, standing in front of a house that suddenly felt impossibly large and impossibly empty. Corinne had already started making lists of what needed to be done, because that was how she coped with things, and I was grateful for her organizational instincts because my own mind felt like it was filled with static. The funeral was small, just a handful of neighbors and a few of my father's old colleagues from the lumber mill where he had worked as a foreman for 25 years before retiring. People said nice things about him, called him a quiet man, a private man, someone who kept to himself but was always willing to help when you needed it. I nodded along and shook hands and accepted casseroles wrapped in aluminum foil, and through it all I kept thinking about the garage. That might sound strange, but you have to understand something about my father and that garage. It was his domain, his sanctuary, the one place in the house where nobody else was allowed to go without his explicit permission. As a kid, I learned very quickly that the garage was off limits, not because he ever hit me or anything like that, but because the one time I wandered in there looking for a bicycle pump, he found me and his face transformed into something I had never seen before. Pure, absolute fury, the kind that makes your whole body go cold. He grabbed my arm hard enough to leave bruises and dragged me out of there, and he did not speak to me for 3 days afterward. After that incident, which happened when I was maybe 9 or 10, I never went near the garage again. Neither did Corinne, neither did anyone. My father kept a heavy padlock on the side door and another on the main garage door, and he carried the keys on a chain attached to his belt at all times. When I got older and started asking questions, he would just stare at me with those pale gray eyes of his and say, it was none of my business, that a man was entitled to his privacy, that some things were not meant to be shared. I assumed he was building something in there, maybe a boat or some kind of woodworking project, something he wanted to keep secret until it was finished. That was the story I told myself anyway, the explanation that let me sleep at night and not think too hard about why my own father treated one room of his house like it contained nuclear launch codes. Corinne had her own theory, which was that he was hoarding money in there, cash he did not want the government to know about. We even joked about it sometimes, called it Fort Knox, laughed nervously whenever the subject came up. But now he was gone, and someone had to deal with the property. Corinne had a husband and 2 kids back in Seattle, a job she could not take more than a week off from, so the task of cleaning out the house fell mostly to me. I worked remotely as a software developer, which meant I could set up my laptop anywhere with decent Wi-Fi and keep billing hours, while I sorted through 40 years of accumulated belongings. The first few days were exactly what you would expect. Endless trips to the donation center with boxes of old clothes, arguments with Corinne over the phone about what to keep and what to throw away, moments of unexpected grief when I found something like my mother's handwriting on a recipe card tucked inside a cookbook. I avoided the garage. I told myself I was saving it for last, that I needed to deal with the easier stuff first. But the truth was that I was scared. Not scared of what I might find exactly, but scared of finally knowing what my father had been hiding all those years. Scared that the answer might change everything I thought I knew about him. On the 8th day after the funeral, I ran out of excuses. The house was mostly empty. The paperwork was sorted, and the only thing left was the garage and whatever waited inside. I found the keys in a small wooden box on my father's nightstand, right where the hospice nurse said they would be. There were 3 of them on a tarnished brass ring, each one worn smooth from decades of use. My hands felt numb as I walked across the backyard toward the side door, the spring mud sucking at my boots with every step. The garage was a separate structure from the main house, a concrete block building with no windows and a roof covered in green moss. Looked like a bunker, like something designed to keep people out. And standing in front of it, I understood for the first time just how much effort my father had put into making sure nobody ever saw what was inside. I fitted the first key into the padlock, turned it, and heard the mechanism click open with a sound that seemed much too loud in the quiet afternoon air. The smell hit me before I even got the door fully open. A thick, musty odor of dust and old paper, and something else underneath. Something faintly metallic that I could not quite identify. I fumbled for a light switch along the interior wall and found one, a single bare bulb that flickered twice before casting a weak yellow glow across the space. The garage was smaller than I remembered, maybe 20 feet by 15, with concrete floors and walls lined with metal shelving units. Most of the shelves held exactly what you would expect in a garage: old paint cans and rusted tools and boxes of nails and screws. But against the far wall, directly opposite the door, stood a tall metal cabinet with a padlock of its own. It was industrial looking, the kind of thing you might see in a high school locker room, painted a dull gray that had chipped in places to reveal darker gray underneath. I knew immediately that this was what my father had been protecting all along. Not the garage itself, but whatever was locked inside that cabinet. The second key on the ring fit the padlock perfectly, and when I pulled the doors open, the hinges screamed like they had not moved in years. The first thing I saw was the jewelry. Rings, necklaces, bracelets, earrings. All of them tangled together in a shallow cardboard box on the top shelf. Some of the pieces looked expensive, gold and silver with gemstones that caught the light, while others were cheap costume stuff, the kind you might buy at a drugstore. None of it belonged to my mother. I knew that immediately because my mother had never owned much jewelry, and what little she had, Corinne and I had divided between us after she died. Below the jewelry box there was a stack of wallets, maybe 15 or 20 of them, all different styles and colors and states of wear. I picked one up with trembling fingers and opened it to find a California driver's license belonging to a woman named Denise Hartley, born in 1961, with an address in Sacramento. The photo showed a thin blonde woman with tired eyes and a smile that did not quite reach them. I picked up another wallet and found a license for a man named Theodore Baines from Portland, Oregon. Another one belonged to someone named Yolanda Fitch from Boise, Idaho. Every single wallet contained an ID, and every single ID belonged to someone I had never heard of. Someone with no connection to my family or my father's life as far as I knew. My legs gave out and I sat down hard on the cold concrete floor, still holding one of the wallets in my hand. I stayed there for a long time, maybe 5 minutes, maybe 20, just staring at the open cabinet and trying to make sense of what I was seeing. There had to be an explanation, I kept telling myself. Maybe my father collected lost wallets. Maybe he found them on the road during his business trips and always meant to mail them back, but never got around to it. But even as I formed that thought, I knew it was ridiculous. Knew it the way you know something in your bones before your brain catches up. Because underneath the wallets there were other things. Things that made the innocent explanation impossible. A woman's floral blouse, carefully folded, with a dark stain on the collar that I refused to look at too closely. A man's leather belt with the initials TB stamped into it. A child's sneaker, just one, size 6, faded pink with a cartoon character on the side that I vaguely recognized from the 80s. And stuffed into the corner of the bottom shelf, a manila envelope thick with newspaper clippings that had yellowed with age. I do not remember deciding to open the envelope, only that suddenly the clippings were spread out on the floor in front of me, and I was reading them one by one with a kind of numb detachment, like I was watching someone else go through the motions. The headlines blurred together at first, but certain words kept jumping out at me. Missing, vanished, last seen, foul play suspected. The articles came from newspapers all over the western states, places like Reno and Salt Lake City, and Spokane and Billings, and they spanned nearly 3 decades from the late 70s to the mid-2000s. Each one told the story of someone who had disappeared without a trace, someone whose family was desperate for answers, someone who had simply walked out of their life one day and never came back. Denise Hartley, the woman from the first wallet I had opened, was there in a clipping from 1989. She had vanished from a rest stop along Interstate 80 while driving home from visiting her sister. Theodore Baines had disappeared in 1994 while hitchhiking through Montana. Yolanda Fitch had gone missing in 2003 after leaving a bar in downtown Boise. There were others too, names I did not recognize because I had not looked through all the wallets yet. But I knew if I matched them up, I would find a wallet or a piece of jewelry or a scrap of clothing for every single one. I called the police that night, or maybe I should say I called them the next morning, because by the time I finished going through everything in that cabinet, it was well past midnight. A deputy from the county sheriff's office came out first, a young guy with a patchy beard who clearly thought he was responding to some kind of prank call. But then he saw the cabinet and the wallets and the clippings, and his face went pale, and he stepped back outside to radio for backup. Within 2 hours, there were 6 patrol cars in the driveway, and crime scene tape stretched across the garage door, and people in latex gloves carrying evidence bags back and forth, while I sat on the porch wrapped in a blanket someone had given me. A detective named Ingram sat down next to me at some point, a heavy-set woman in her 50s with short gray hair, and a voice that managed to be both gentle and absolutely serious at the same time. She asked me questions for what felt like hours, questions about my father, about his habits, about whether I had ever suspected anything, about the business trips he used to take when I was a kid. Those business trips, it turned out, were the key to everything. My father had worked as a foreman at the lumber mill, but what I did not know, what I had never thought to question, was that his job also required him to travel several times a year to meet with suppliers and inspect timber operations in other states. He would be gone for a week or 2 at a time, sometimes longer, and when he came back, he never talked about where he had been or what he had done. I always assumed it was boring work stuff, the kind of thing a kid would not care about anyway. But Detective Ingram told me that investigators in at least 4 states had been looking at my father for years, going back to the early 90s when a witness reported seeing a man matching his description talking to Yolanda Fitch outside that bar in Boise the night she disappeared. They never had enough evidence to arrest him, never had anything concrete that would hold up in court. Just a pattern of travel that seemed to coincide with disappearances and a gut feeling that something was wrong. She told me they had even interviewed him once back in 1998 about a missing woman in Wyoming. But he had an alibi that checked out, and they had to let him go. All those years, she said, they knew something was not right about him, but they could never prove it. And now here was the proof, locked in a cabinet in his garage, waiting for someone to finally open it. I stayed in Montana for another 3 weeks while the investigation unfolded, answering more questions, providing DNA samples, signing documents that gave the police permission to dig up parts of the property. They found remains buried in the woods behind the house, 4 sets of bones in shallow graves that my father had apparently dug over the course of several decades. Dental records confirmed that 2 of them matched people from the newspaper clippings, including Denise Hartley, the woman whose wallet I had opened first. The forensic team estimated there could be more, scattered across multiple states along the routes my father used to travel, and the FBI got involved at some point because the crimes crossed so many jurisdictions. Corinne flew out when the news broke nationally, and we sat together in a motel room watching our father's face appear on cable news, listening to reporters describe him as a suspected serial killer who had evaded justice for over 30 years. She kept asking me if I remembered anything, any sign that something was wrong, and I kept telling her no. I did not. He was just our father, quiet and private, and sometimes angry, but never anything that made me think he was capable of this. But that was a lie, or at least not the whole truth, because I did remember something I had buried so deep I almost convinced myself it never happened. I was 12 years old, and my father had just come back from one of his trips. It was late, past midnight, and I woke up because I heard the truck pulling into the driveway. I got out of bed and went to my window, which looked out over the backyard and the garage beyond it. The moon was full that night, bright enough that I could see everything clearly, and I watched my father get out of the truck and walk around to the passenger side. He opened the door and pulled something out, something large and heavy that he carried over his shoulder like a rolled-up carpet. Except it was not a carpet. I knew that even then, knew it from the way it bent in places a carpet would not bend. Knew it from the glimpse of pale skin I caught in the moonlight before he disappeared into the garage. I stood at that window for a long time, waiting for him to come back out, and when he finally did, his clothes were different and he was carrying a garbage bag that he threw into the bed of the truck. He looked up at the house then, and for one terrible moment I thought he saw me, thought our eyes met across the darkness. But he just stood there for a few seconds and then went inside. And the next morning at breakfast, he was the same as always, quiet and distant and completely unreadable. I never told anyone what I saw. I was 12 years old and I did not have the words for it, did not have the framework to understand what it meant. So I did what children do when reality becomes too frightening to accept. I convinced myself it was a dream, a nightmare, something my imagination had invented. And eventually I believed it. I live in Denver now, same apartment I had before any of this happened, same job, same routine. The house in Montana was seized as part of the investigation, and I do not know what will happen to it, do not really care. Corinne and I talk on the phone every few weeks, but there is a distance between us now that was not there before, a shared trauma that neither of us knows how to process. The FBI identified 11 victims in total, spanning from 1978 to 2006, though they suspect there may be others they will never find. My father, they told me, fit a specific profile, someone who targeted vulnerable people, drifters and hitchhikers and runaways, people whose disappearances would not make headlines, people who nobody would look too hard for. He was patient and careful and methodical, and if he had not kept those souvenirs in his cabinet, if he had not held on to the proof of what he had done, he would have died as nothing more than a quiet old man who kept to himself. Sometimes I wonder why he saved those things, whether it was arrogance or compulsion, or some twisted need to remember. Sometimes I wonder if he wanted to be caught, if leaving those keys on his nightstand was his final confession. But mostly I try not to wonder about anything at all. I go to work and I come home, and I do not think about the man who raised me, the man who taught me to ride a bike and helped me with my homework and sat across from me at the dinner table for 18 years while carrying secrets that would have destroyed everything if I had known. He was my father. He was also a monster, and I have to live with both of those truths for the rest of my life. Around 11 on a Wednesday night, I found myself pushing a shopping cart through the fluorescent maze of a Kroger in suburban Atlanta. My sister had just given birth to twins 3 days earlier, and I had volunteered to do her grocery run since her husband was working night shifts at the hospital. At 26, fresh off a breakup that left me crashing on my parents' couch, I figured helping out was the least I could do to feel useful. The store was practically deserted at that hour. Just a teenager restocking cereal boxes and an elderly man contemplating yogurt flavors in the dairy aisle. I remember the muzak playing some watered-down version of a Beatles song, the kind of detail that sticks with you after something terrible almost happens. My cart squeaked with every rotation of its front left wheel, this rhythmic complaint that echoed through empty aisles. I grabbed everything on the list: diapers, formula, those specific crackers my sister craved during pregnancy and apparently still wanted. The whole trip took maybe 40 minutes, and I was thinking about nothing more significant than whether I should grab myself a bag of chips for the drive home. The parking lot sprawled out in front of the store like a concrete ocean, maybe 200 spaces with only about 15 cars scattered across it. Most of them clustered near the entrance, but I had parked further out near a broken lamppost because it was the only spot I could find when I arrived earlier, and the lot was busier. Now, walking toward my car with 4 plastic bags cutting into my fingers, I noticed how quiet everything had become. The highway noise that usually hummed in the background seemed muted, absorbed by the humid Georgia air. My footsteps sounded impossibly loud against the asphalt, each step a small announcement of my location. I was maybe 30 feet from my car, a silver Camry that my dad had passed down to me after buying himself a truck, when I noticed movement between 2 vehicles about 20 feet to my left. A man stepped out from behind a dark SUV, and even from that distance I could tell he was looking directly at me. He started walking in my direction with this purposeful stride that made my chest tighten. Not running, not casual, but deliberate, like someone who had been waiting. He was probably in his late 40s, wearing a beige jacket that looked too warm for the weather and jeans that seemed brand new, stiff and dark. His hair was thinning on top, combed back in a way that revealed a prominent forehead with deep creases. What struck me most was how normal he looked, not disheveled, not obviously threatening, just an average man you might see anywhere. He raised one hand in a wave as he approached, and his face arranged itself into something resembling friendliness, though his eyes stayed fixed on me with an intensity that the smile never reached. "Hey there," he called out when he was about 15 feet away, still closing the distance. "Sorry to bother you, but I think I know that car." He pointed toward my Camry, and I instinctively looked at it, which meant taking my eyes off him for a second. When I looked back, he had covered another 5 feet. My grip tightened on the plastic bags, the handles digging deeper into my palms. Every instinct told me to keep moving, but something about his tone, conversational, almost neighborly, made me hesitate. "Excuse me?" I said, and I hated how my voice came out smaller than I intended. He stopped about 8 feet away, close enough that I could see the stubble on his chin and a small scar above his left eyebrow, shaped like a crescent moon. "That Camry," he said, nodding toward my car again. "Silver, right? 2012 or 2013? I swear I know that car from somewhere. You live around Decatur?" I shook my head, taking a small step backward. "No, I think you have me confused with someone else." He tilted his head like a dog hearing a strange sound, and that gesture sent a ripple of unease through me. "You sure? Because I could swear I have seen you before. Maybe at the Publix on Memorial Drive, the gas station near the elementary school." Each location he named felt like a probe, a fishing expedition designed to extract information. I realized he was moving again, not toward me directly, but angling slightly to my right, positioning himself between me and the most direct path to my car. The bags in my hands suddenly felt like anchors, weighing me down when I needed to be light and fast. "I really need to go," I said, forcing my feet to move. I angled left, away from him, planning to loop around and approach my car from a different direction. But he matched my movement, stepping sideways to maintain that invisible barrier between me and the Camry. Hold on," he said, and there was something different in his voice now, a slight edge creeping in beneath the friendly facade. "I am just trying to figure this out. It is driving me crazy. What is your name? Maybe I know your family." My heart was hammering against my ribs, and I became hyper-aware of everything around me. The distant hum of a car on the highway, the flickering of a working lamppost 2 rows over, the complete absence of any other human being within shouting distance. The store entrance seemed impossibly far away, a rectangle of light that might as well have been on another planet. I thought about screaming, but something told me that would escalate things in a way I could not control. Instead, I kept my voice as steady as I could manage and said, "I do not know you. Please leave me alone." His expression shifted then, just slightly, the mask slipping for half a second. I saw something cold underneath, something calculating. "That is not very friendly," he said, and he took another step closer. We were maybe 5 feet apart now. I could smell cigarette smoke clinging to his jacket mixed with something else, a chemical smell, like industrial cleaner. "I'm just being neighborly here, trying to make a connection. You know how rare that is these days. Everyone is so paranoid, so unfriendly." He kept talking, a steady stream of words that felt designed to keep me in place, to make me doubt my own instincts. Maybe he was just lonely. Maybe I was overreacting. Those thoughts flickered through my mind even as every cell in my body screamed at me to run. I glanced to my right and saw a narrow gap between a pickup truck and a minivan, just wide enough for me to squeeze through. Beyond that, there was an open stretch of pavement leading to the store entrance. If I could get through that gap before he could react, I might make it. I shifted my weight onto the balls of my feet, the plastic bags rustling slightly with the movement. He must have seen something change in my posture because his hand shot out and grabbed my wrist before I could take a single step. His grip was tight, fingers digging into the soft skin above my hand, and I felt the shock of contact surge through me like electricity. "Hey now," he said, his voice dropping lower, losing all pretense of friendliness. "Where are you going? We are just talking here. No need to be rude." Up close, I could see his eyes clearly for the first time, pale blue, almost gray, with pupils that seemed too large for the amount of light in the parking lot. There was nothing behind them that I recognized as human warmth. I yanked my arm back, hard, and he released me but moved forward at the same time, hurting me backward until my hip collided with the side mirror of a parked sedan. The impact sent a jolt of pain through my side, and I dropped 2 of the grocery bags. Cans rolled across the asphalt, making hollow sounds as they scattered. "Look what you made me do," I said, the words coming out in a rush, my brain grasping for anything that might normalize this situation, might return us to a world where strangers did not grab you in parking lots. "Just pick them up," he said, gesturing at the fallen groceries. "I will wait." And that was when I understood with absolute clarity what was happening. He wanted me to bend down, to make myself smaller, more vulnerable, to take my eyes off him. The way he stood there, blocking my path to the open lot, angling me further into the canyon formed by parked cars. This was not random. This was practiced. I thought about a true crime podcast I had listened to during my commute. Something about predators choosing locations and timing, about how they test boundaries before escalating. Every interaction so far had been a test. The friendly wave. The questions about where I lived. The grab when I tried to leave. Each one pushing a little further, seeing how I would react. My mind raced through options. I could scream, but the store was so far away, and who knew if anyone would hear. I could fight, but he was bigger than me and I had no idea if he was armed. I could try to run, but he had already shown he was faster than he looked. The keys in my pocket pressed against my thigh, and I remembered something my mother had told me years ago about holding your keys between your fingers like a weapon. I did not pick up the groceries. Instead, I took a deep breath and screamed as loud as I could. Not a word, just a raw, primal sound that tore out of my throat and echoed across the empty lot. The man flinched, his eyes darting toward the store entrance, and in that half-second of distraction I bolted. I ran straight for the gap between the pickup and minivan, squeezing through so fast that the minivan's mirror scraped against my arm, leaving a burning line of pain I barely registered. Behind me, I heard him curse and the sound of his footsteps pounding against the pavement. I did not look back. I just ran, my lungs already burning, my legs pumping harder than they had since high school track practice. The store entrance grew larger with every stride, 50 feet, 40, 30. I could hear him getting closer, his breathing heavy and ragged, and I pushed myself faster, faster, until I burst through the automatic doors and nearly collided with a display of energy drinks. The teenager who had been stocking shelves looked up with wide eyes, and I gasped out the words, "Call the police," before doubling over, hands on my knees trying to catch my breath. The kid must have seen something in my face because he did not ask questions, just pulled out his phone and dialed. I turned around and looked through the glass doors, my heart still slamming against my chest. The man was standing at the edge of the parking lot, right where the overhead lights gave way to shadow. He was just watching, not moving, his hands hanging loose at his sides. Even from that distance, I could feel his gaze on me, heavy and cold. Then a car pulled into the lot, a woman in a minivan, probably coming for a late-night grocery run just like I had, and he turned and walked away. Not running, not hurried, just a casual stroll like he had all the time in the world. He disappeared between two rows of parked cars, and a moment later I heard an engine start somewhere in the darkness. By the time the police arrived 12 minutes later, he was long gone. The woman in the minivan had seen nothing, noticed nothing. To her, it was just an ordinary Wednesday night. She had no idea what had almost happened in the same lot where she was now parking her car and checking her grocery list. 2 officers took my statement inside the store, in a small break room that smelled like burnt coffee and microwave dinners. I described everything I could remember: the beige jacket, the crescent scar, the pale eyes, the dark SUV he had been standing near, which was gone by the time we checked. They asked me if I had gotten a license plate number, and I had not. Of course I had not. Because who thinks about license plates when they are running for their life? One of the officers, a woman with graying hair pulled back in a tight bun, kept exchanging glances with her partner in a way that made me nervous. When I finished talking, she asked if I could come down to the station the next day to look at some photographs. "Has this happened before?" I asked, and the silence that followed told me everything. They would not confirm anything that night, just said they were investigating similar incidents and my description might help. I drove home in a daze, checking my rearview mirror every 30 seconds, jumping at every set of headlights that appeared behind me. My sister's groceries sat in the passenger seat, and I remember thinking how absurd it was that I still had them, that somewhere in the chaos of running and screaming I had managed to hold onto 2 of the 4 bags. 3 days later, a detective named Reginald Okonkwo called me. He had a deep voice, calm and measured, the kind of voice that probably helped people feel safe when they were falling apart. He told me they had arrested a man matching my description at a Target parking lot in Marietta, about 20 miles from the Kroger where I had encountered him. A security guard had noticed him approaching a woman loading groceries into her car, using the same routine. The friendly wave, the questions about the car looking familiar. This time, someone had intervened before anything could happen. When they searched his vehicle, they found zip ties, a hunting knife, and a roll of duct tape in a duffel bag in the trunk. They also found 2 driver's licenses that did not belong to him. The detective paused before telling me the next part, and I could hear him choosing his words carefully. 2 women had gone missing from grocery store parking lots in the Atlanta area over the previous 6 weeks. Both had been found, alive but traumatized, in a foreclosed house on the outskirts of the city. The man had held them for several days before releasing them in remote locations. He had used the same approach with both of them, pretending to recognize their car, asking friendly questions, positioning himself to cut off their escape routes. I was going to be his third. His name was Dennis Lamar Finch, 47 years old, a former appliance repair technician who had lived alone in a rented apartment less than 10 miles from my parents' house. The news covered the arrest for a few days, showing his mugshot on every local channel. That same unremarkable face, those same pale eyes staring blankly at the camera. Watching him on television, you would never guess what he was capable of. He looked like someone who might fix your refrigerator or wave at you from across the street while watering his lawn. That was the part that stayed with me, long after the trial, long after he was sentenced. The complete normalcy of him. I testified at the trial, sat in that witness box and described every detail of that night while he watched me from the defense table. He never showed any emotion, not when I talked about him grabbing my wrist, not when the other victims described what he had done to them. Just that same blank expression, like he was watching something mildly boring on television. The jury took less than 4 hours to convict him on all counts. He got 45 years, no possibility of parole. It has been almost 4 years now, and I still do not shop alone at night. I park as close to store entrances as possible, even if it means circling the lot 5 times. I keep my keys in my hand the moment I step outside, and I have taken 2 self-defense classes. My therapist says these are normal responses to trauma, that my brain is just trying to protect me from something that already happened. Maybe she is right, but sometimes, late at night, I think about how close I came to disappearing. I think about those 2 other women, what they went through in that foreclosed house, and I wonder what he had planned for me. I think about that moment in the parking lot when he told me to pick up the groceries, and how easy it would have been to just do it. To doubt myself, to be polite, to ignore every alarm bell ringing in my head. That is what scares me most. Not the memory of his face or his voice or his grip on my wrist. It is knowing how close I came to making a different choice, to being too afraid to scream, too polite to run. If you take anything from this, let it be this. Trust your instincts. If something feels wrong, it probably is. Do not worry about being rude. Do not worry about overreacting. Just get out, get somewhere safe, and worry about embarrassment later. Embarrassment fades. The alternative does not. Most of this happened during a stretch of my life when I was juggling long shifts at a small marketing firm and spending most evenings alone in my apartment, trying to distract myself from how stagnant everything felt. Matching with someone online wasn't unusual for me, but meeting someone who seemed genuinely attentive from the very first message caught me off guard. He introduced himself as Ethan, mentioned he worked in consulting, and had this way of asking questions that made me feel like he was actually listening. I remember sitting on my couch that night eating leftover pasta, surprised at how naturally the conversation flowed. He wasn't pushing anything weird, wasn't making inappropriate jokes, just easy, calm exchanges that somehow made the room feel warmer. By the time I went to bed, I was smiling like an idiot, wondering how someone like him had even noticed me. The momentum between us picked up fast in a way that felt flattering at first, as if I'd stepped into some alternate version of my life, where I mattered more than I realized. Ethan would send these short voice messages in the mornings, sounding half awake and friendly, talking about grabbing overpriced lattes before work, or rushing to catch a meeting he claimed to be running late for. He didn't just text "good morning." He'd say things like how he hoped the weather held up for my commute, or how he thought I deserved a quieter day. Small things, but no one had spoken to me like that in a long time. Within a week, he suggested meeting in person, and even though the pace was making me nervous, I let myself get swept up in it. The attention felt intoxicating, like someone had finally decided I was worth choosing. When we met for the first time at a small cafe near a busy downtown street, he showed up wearing a navy jacket with scuffed elbows and a watch that looked older than he claimed it was. His hair was neatly cut, but one side stuck up like he'd been in a rush and hadn't noticed. He smiled easily, not forced or awkward, and his laugh came out in these short, breathy bursts that made other people at nearby tables glance over. We talked about travel, work, hobbies, and he had an answer for everything. Smooth, confident, polished in a way I couldn't quite place. Still, he paid for everything without blinking and walked me back to my car like he'd known me forever. I told myself the annoying tug in my chest wasn't fear. It was just unfamiliar excitement. Over the next couple of weeks, Ethan's generosity escalated. He sent food to my apartment on nights he knew I was working late, bought concert tickets for a band I'd mentioned once in passing, and even sent a small package with a book he said reminded him of me. It all felt flattering, but there were moments that didn't line up cleanly. He'd mention a project at work, and then forget he'd already described it differently 2 days earlier. He said he'd grown up in a coastal town, but later mentioned being from the Midwest. When I teased him lightly about the contradictions, he brushed them off with a quick joke, or changed the subject entirely. None of it felt alarming yet, but there were little threads that tugged at my attention when I lay awake at night replaying conversations. I kept telling myself that everyone exaggerates sometimes, and maybe I was reading too much into it. One evening, while Ethan was supposedly on a business trip, he called me from what sounded like a busy hotel lobby. His voice carried that same warm tone, but behind it I could hear overlapping conversations and the clatter of dishes, almost like a restaurant rather than a hotel. He said he'd call me again once he got to his room, but the second call never came. Instead, he texted a blurry photo of a suitcase near a generic carpeted hallway. Something about the image felt strange. The angle, the lighting, even the suitcase itself looked different from the one he'd carried when we met. I brushed it aside at first, telling myself it was a pointless detail to fixate on. But that night, lying in bed, I kept replaying the sound of all those voices behind him, wondering why it didn't match any hotel lobby I'd ever been in. The next morning, I did something I hadn't planned. I searched his full name online. Not a deep search, just the usual quick look everyone does at some point. Nothing reliable came up. Not a LinkedIn profile, not old pictures, not anything that matched the man I'd met. His phone number traced back to an area nowhere near the city he claimed he lived in. When I asked him casually about his workplace later that day, he gave me a company name I'd never heard of and muttered something about their private contract work, as if that explained the lack of information. It wasn't enough to raise an alarm on its own, but the gaps were widening, and my mind kept drifting back to those small inconsistencies that were starting to pile up. A few days later, while waiting for him outside a bookstore where we'd planned to meet, I watched the minutes tick by with no sign of him. He finally texted saying he'd been called into an emergency meeting and couldn't make it. The strange part was what happened right afterward. A woman approached me, maybe in her 30s, with her hair tied back and a faded canvas tote slung over her shoulder. She asked if I was waiting for someone named Ethan. The question hit me so sharply, it felt like someone had pulled a string inside my chest. She explained that she wasn't trying to pry, but she thought she recognized my situation because she'd been through something similar. Before I could respond, she apologized and walked away briskly, disappearing into a crowd at the crosswalk. I didn't chase her. I just stood there holding my phone, wondering what exactly she had meant. That encounter shook me more than I wanted to admit, so that night I dug a little deeper. It started harmlessly, reverse image searching the pictures he'd sent me. 2 of them came up blank, but one matched an account that had been deleted years ago. The image tied to a username with barely any archived posts. The colors in the profile photo looked slightly altered, as if someone had edited it to appear newer. I tried searching his workplace again with different spellings, different keywords, and eventually I found an old forum thread where people mentioned a man using multiple identities tied to consulting work that didn't actually exist. No full names, no photos, but the descriptions lined up almost perfectly with Ethan's stories. My chest tensed as I read every line, feeling more and more like I'd stepped into a version of someone else's nightmare, without realizing it. The turning point came when I messaged Ethan that I needed some time to think. I didn't accuse him of anything. I barely hinted at my doubts. Within minutes, his tone shifted. He went from affectionate to oddly defensive, insisting that he'd opened up more to me than to anyone else, and that he hoped I wasn't buying into rumors. I hadn't mentioned any rumors. His reaction felt strangely rehearsed, as if he'd given that same speech to someone else before. When I didn't reply right away, he sent a long paragraph about trust, timing, and how people love to tear down anyone who seems successful. Something in the way he wrote, too polished, too perfectly phrased, made the air in my apartment feel heavy. I set my phone down and didn't respond until the next day. When morning came, a message from an unknown number popped up on my screen. It was short, almost clipped. "Be careful. He did this to my cousin." No details, no name attached, just that sentence. A second text followed a minute later with a screenshot of a police bulletin, blurred, but clear enough to make out a familiar jawline and the slant of a crooked eyebrow. It wasn't Ethan's name underneath the photo, though. It was a completely different one. Seeing that picture, even with the poor resolution, sent a wave of realization through me. Ethan wasn't just bending the truth. He was built entirely out of lies. The bulletin mentioned financial manipulation, emotional coercion, and a pattern of disappearing before charges progressed. My pulse hammered in my ears as I read it over and over, finally accepting that whoever I'd been talking to wasn't who he pretended to be. Eventually, I contacted a detective whose name was listed on the bulletin. I half expected them to tell me it was outdated or incomplete, but instead they asked for my address and came by later that afternoon. The detective, a calm man with silver streaks in his hair and a battered leather notebook, listened carefully while I recounted everything. He told me the individual I knew as Ethan had cycled through at least 4 identities in recent years, and that multiple partners had come forward with stories disturbingly similar to mine. What shocked me most was learning how calculated it all was. Each relationship starting with harmless charm, building into extravagant generosity, and ultimately ending with accounts drained or credit cards opened without consent. I felt sick hearing it laid out like that, realizing how close I'd come to losing everything. Cutting contact wasn't as simple as blocking his number. For days afterward, I kept getting calls from unknown area codes, silence on the other end each time. One afternoon, a delivery driver dropped a package at my door, a book wrapped in brown paper with no return address. It was the same title Ethan had gifted me before, only this copy was brand new, still sealed in plastic. I reported it immediately, and the detective assured me they were tracking every attempt he made to reach out. Eventually, the calls stopped, and no more packages came. Life settled back into something resembling normal, though I'm not sure I'll ever fully relax the way I used to. Every now and then, when I walk past that bookstore where the woman approached me, I catch myself scanning the crowd, wondering how many people have crossed paths with him without realizing it. I didn't lose money, but I lost the version of myself that believed a kind voice and steady attention were proof of someone's character. I remember that period of my life as a time when everything felt predictable in the best way. I worked in a mid-sized distribution office, handling order coordination during the late shifts, usually leaving after most people were already gone. My routine rarely changed: coffee on the way in, headphones during the first hour of sorting emails, lunch with the same handful of coworkers who liked quiet tables. That consistency made it easy to notice when someone new began drifting into my orbit. His name was Colin, a recent transfer from another branch. He didn't draw attention to himself. If anything, he blended into the background so well that people often forgot he was in the room. Still, he'd offer small comments here and there. Nothing strange, just polite observations about workloads or how chaotic certain shifts could get. The acquaintance started because we happened to clock out around the same time for about a week. He'd walk beside me toward the staff exit, not talking much, and honestly, I didn't think anything of it. He didn't radiate confidence or charm. He just seemed like someone who hadn't quite figured out how to make friends in a new place. I'd respond when he spoke, ask basic things like how he was adjusting or whether he'd settled into the system yet. It felt harmless, a workplace courtesy, something you do so the environment doesn't feel stiff. I never sensed anything intense behind his comments, no undertones of interest or anything that would make me question the small talk. The first shift where things shifted, I was updating a shipment log when he approached. Leaning slightly over the edge of my desk, he asked if I wanted to grab a drink after work. The way he asked wasn't inappropriate, but something about his expression made it clear he expected a specific answer. I kept my tone light, told him I didn't go out with coworkers but appreciated the offer. He nodded, said, "Of course," and walked off without any visible reaction. I genuinely thought that would be the end of it. Just a moment of awkwardness that would fade with time. But over the next days, he kept appearing at my workstation without a sound, standing too close, watching my screen like he had some responsibility over what I was doing. At first, I told myself he was just trying to be helpful. But then he began completing tasks directly in my queue, things assigned to me alone, with my credentials tied to them. He'd do it during breaks or the rare times I stepped away, and when I confronted him gently, He'd give this puzzled look, as if I should be grateful. I overheard him telling another employee that we were basically together, and the casual tone he used made my chest tighten in a way I couldn't ignore. When I tried to put some distance between us, shorter replies, leaving the area more often, changing where I took breaks, he reacted by filing complaints against me. Accusations that I had cornered him, pressured him, sent inappropriate emails. Emails that investigators later showed me. Messages that looked like they came from my address but weren't written by me. The situation spiraled so quickly that I barely had time to process how absurd things were becoming. Security pulled me into a small conference room one afternoon, asking why I had emailed Colin messages implying I wanted to fix things between us privately. The timestamps matched moments when I was in meetings with multiple witnesses, but there they were on the logs, sent from my account. I remember sitting there trying to explain that I hadn't written any of it, and watching the supervisor's expression twist into this uncomfortable uncertainty, like he wanted to believe me but had no idea how to handle what he was seeing. Meanwhile, Colin kept acting like everything happening was just a normal dispute between coworkers. When I walked past him, he'd tilt his head slightly, as if we shared some secret no one else understood. After HR got involved, I thought things might slow down, but he started finding new ways to insert himself into places he didn't belong. The building had storage rooms that the cameras didn't fully cover, blind corners created by old shelving and poor installation. He began showing up in those exact spots whenever I passed through them alone. He wouldn't touch me, but he'd block part of the exit with his body, speaking softly, saying things like, "We could just talk if you stopped avoiding me." The worst part was how calculated it felt. Every time I changed my routine, different routes, different break times, he'd adapt, almost like he was mapping the building in real time through my movements. I started sticking close to coworkers, walking in groups, avoiding any hallway where I couldn't see both ends. Even then, he found ways to get to me. He'd slide papers onto my desk containing strange handwritten notes about how relationships take effort, or how I made things complicated. My manager tried intervening once, but Colin just smiled awkwardly and acted confused, pretending he didn't understand why I interpreted his behavior as anything more than attempts at reconciliation. The unsettling part was how good he was at playing harmless. He knew exactly when to panic, when to act timid, when to look overwhelmed. Around others, he became this soft-spoken guy who just wanted to fix an imaginary conflict. The night everything peaked, I stayed later than planned to finish end-of-day reports. The building had that hollow quietness it gets after everyone leaves. Lights humming faintly, vents clicking. The kind of silence that makes every sound feel too sharp. I kept checking the hallway, half expecting him to appear, but my floor seemed empty. When I finally walked out to the parking lot, the air felt heavy, like a storm was building somewhere far away. My car sat alone near the back row, and even from a distance I noticed something about it looked wrong. The angle felt off, slightly slumped toward the ground in a way I couldn't ignore, but I didn't understand what was going on until I got closer. All 4 tires were sliced open, the cuts clean and deliberate, not the kind of damage you get from hitting debris. A piece of paper was tucked beneath the wiper, held in place by the breeze. I remember staring at it for a moment before picking it up, my pulse stumbling when I recognized his handwriting. The message read, "You don't get to leave until I say so." There was no signature, but it didn't need one. Every letter leaned forward in the exact same way as the notes he'd left on my desk. I backed away from the car instinctively, scanning the lot, half expecting him to step out from behind one of the pillars or from between the delivery trucks. I ran back toward the building, but the main doors had already locked for the night, leaving only the employee exit on the side. I hovered near the doorway, trying to call someone from security, but the signal in that corner of the lot always dropped to almost nothing. While I was waiting for the bar to fill enough to get a call through, I noticed movement near the fence. Just a shift of darkness, but enough to make my breath hitch. I ducked inside the stairwell and stayed there, listening for steps or voices. Nothing came. After a few minutes, one of the night shift supervisors returned from a smoke break and walked me to the security office, insisting I shouldn't go back out alone. They reviewed the cameras, but the lot angles were terrible, and the vandalism had happened just outside the visible range. When the investigators finally got involved, everything unraveled at once. They discovered he'd been accessing internal systems he shouldn't have touched, logging into schedule trackers, opening archived shift data, reviewing my time card history, even monitoring when my badge scanned through certain doors. The IT team found a pattern stretching back months, with him quietly building a profile of my routines. The worst discovery was that he had manipulated certain camera feeds during specific moments when he, coincidentally, bumped into me in those storage areas. He acted like all of this was a misunderstanding, claiming he just liked being prepared, but the digital trail was too thorough to dismiss as anything innocent. I ended up taking extended leave while the company handled the fallout. He was removed from the premises, escorted out in complete silence, not saying a word to anyone. The investigators told me he'd been planning his claim for far longer than anyone expected, but they wouldn't go into detail beyond that. I never saw him again after that night, and part of me still wonders what would have happened if his note hadn't been the thing that finally pushed everything into the open. I've changed jobs since then, changed routines, changed the way I move through spaces. Even now, whenever I walk through a quiet parking lot, I catch myself checking the corners, making sure no one is waiting in those patches of darkness just beyond the lights. Something about that night sticks with me even now, mostly because it started like any other slow weekend in our place. I'd been living with my roommate Tyler for about a year, and most weekends we were out with friends. But that night we were both wiped from work and just wanted a quiet break. The building was old but decent, the kind where sounds carried easily through the hallways, doors shutting, people laughing upstairs, the elevator clanking like it had its own personality. We'd ordered takeout, thrown on a movie, and were just talking about nothing important. Everything felt ordinary in that very specific way that makes what happened next feel even stranger. I remember the air from the open kitchen window drifting in, cooler than usual, and the way it made the blinds click together in a steady rhythm that almost lulled me into sleep. The knock came during a lull in the movie, 3 taps that didn't sound rushed or nervous, just deliberate. Tyler muted the TV and we glanced at each other because it was late enough that nobody we knew would be dropping by. Then came the voice through the door, soft, steady, almost gentle, saying, "Hey, sorry to bother you. Could I borrow a phone for a moment?" It was the kind of tone someone uses when they're trying extra hard to seem harmless. For a second, I wondered if maybe a neighbor got locked out or their battery died. But the way the voice lingered after the question, as if waiting for us to get closer to the door, set off something instinctive inside me. I didn't go near the peephole, and Tyler didn't either. We just stayed completely still, listening. The silence between the door and us stretched out longer than felt normal. Whoever stood outside didn't knock again, didn't repeat the request, just stayed there. We could hear a faint, controlled breathing from the other side, like the person was standing only inches away, paying attention to the tiniest sounds inside our apartment. I remember the way Tyler's expression shifted, not panicked, but focused, the look he got when he was trying to figure out what wasn't matching up. Neither of us said a word. We didn't whisper, didn't move, didn't even turn the movie sound back on. Eventually, footsteps moved down the hall, slow and evenly paced, not hurried like someone who genuinely needed help. The hallway went quiet again, but that quiet didn't feel like safety. It felt like a held breath. About 10 minutes later, my phone buzzed with an emergency alert from the local police department. I thought it was a missing person alert at first, because that's usually what shows up. But this one mentioned a violent assault inside our own building, just 2 floors above us. The message said the suspect had entered the victim's apartment by claiming he needed to borrow a phone. I read it twice before showing it to Tyler, who stared at the screen without saying anything. There was this heavy realization settling in between us, not frantic but cold and certain. That calm voice at our door had been the same man, and if we had answered, even just cracked the door to see who it was, our night would have gone in a completely different direction. We locked every door and window even though we were already on the inside, and for a while we just sat there listening to the building. Every little creak suddenly felt sharper, like the sounds had new meaning. Somewhere upstairs we heard people talking in rushed, uneven voices, and then the distant thumping of emergency responders moving through the stairwell. Tyler kept the lights low, and I remember noticing how the glow from the TV made the living room feel strangely hollow, like the room was just waiting for something else to happen. Neither of us said anything about going to bed or turning the movie back on. It was as if doing anything normal would break whatever thin barrier had kept that man from stepping into our home. A couple of hours later, someone knocked again. This time fast, urgent, unmistakably loud. My whole chest tightened at the sound until a voice identified itself as the police. Tyler checked the peephole before opening the door just a crack, and 2 officers stood there in full uniform, clipboards in hand. One of them asked if we'd heard or seen anything unusual earlier in the night, mentioning the assault upstairs. When we told them about the soft-spoken man and his request, they exchanged a look that wasn't dramatic or exaggerated. Just a brief, knowing glance from 2 people who had already pieced together what was going on. They wrote down everything we could remember, even the tone of his voice, and the officer said something like, "You did the right thing by not answering." Over the next few days, the building felt different. Neighbors who usually nodded politely in the hallway now lingered, asking if we'd heard anything new from the police. The woman who lived across from us, usually quiet and kept to herself, started checking in on us when she saw our door open. It was like the whole floor had suddenly woken up to how vulnerable we'd all been without realizing it. Tyler kept replaying the moment in his head, describing the exact timing of the knocks, wondering if the man had watched our lights from under the door. I couldn't shake the idea that he had picked us randomly, or worse, intentionally, and was just waiting to see if we made a single wrong move. The actual confirmation came from a detective who called me a week later. He explained that the attack hadn't been spontaneous. The man had been studying the building, choosing apartments based on who seemed likely to open the door late at night. He'd been posing as a distressed neighbor to test reactions, and the assault upstairs had happened after someone believed his story long enough to unlock their door. Hearing it laid out like that made my throat tighten. It wasn't just a close call. It was a moment where one tiny decision, staying silent, had kept something terrible from crossing our threshold. I hung up the phone and just sat there, staring at the door like it had become a living thing with its own history now. For a long time after that call, evenings in the apartment didn't feel the same. I found myself paying attention to sounds I never noticed before. The elevator slowing to a stop, the soft tap of pipes cooling at night, the shuffle of someone passing our door on their way to the trash chute. It wasn't fear exactly, more like my senses had been rewired to catch details I used to overlook. Tyler started placing a small metal bar under the doorknob whenever we stayed in for the night, something he laughed about like it was overkill, though his eyes told a different story. The place that once felt relaxed and familiar now carried this quiet tension, as if the walls remembered what almost happened. One night, maybe 2 weeks after the incident, there was a single knock, just one, around dinner time. It wasn't late, but the sound still jolted both of us upright. Tyler went to the peephole immediately, and I stood behind him, barely breathing. It turned out to be a delivery driver at the wrong door, holding a stack of pizzas meant for someone down the hall. Tyler told him politely, and the guy apologized with a confused tilt of his head before walking away. Even though nothing was wrong, the moment left a strange weight in the air, like our minds were still catching up to the idea that a knock didn't automatically mean danger. But the instinct to go silent, to wait things out rather than respond, had become automatic. Eventually, our building installed new security measures, cameras in the hallways, key fobs on every floor entrance, brighter lights that hummed faintly during the night. The management sent out a long email about community safety and updated protocols, though everyone knew the real reason. People carried themselves differently in the hall now, nodding with a bit more awareness, locking their doors a little quicker, The woman 2 floors up moved out shortly after, her door staying dark and empty for weeks before new tenants arrived. Sometimes I wondered if she left because of what happened or because walking past the scene every day became too much. With time, the tension softened, turning into something more manageable, a lesson rather than a constant threat. But every once in a while, when I'm settling in for the night and the building gets quiet enough for the refrigerator hum to echo through the kitchen, I think back to that soft voice outside our door. The calmness in it, the patience, the way he waited, listening. It still unnerves me how ordinary his request sounded and how close we were to letting him in. And even though life moved on and the building feels safe again, I never forget that one simple choice, staying silent, might be the only reason I'm able to tell this story now. Hello everyone. Before we start, make sure to like and subscribe to the channel, and leave a comment with where you're from and what time you're watching. That way, YouTube will keep showing you stories just like this one. Now, let's begin. October 31st, 2016 was supposed to be just another easy night of making extra cash. I was 19, a sophomore at the local community college, and babysitting for the Bradshaw family had become my regular weekend gig. They lived in one of those quiet suburban neighborhoods where the biggest drama was usually someone forgetting to bring their trash cans in. Mr. and Mrs. Bradshaw were heading to some fancy corporate Halloween party downtown, and they needed someone to watch their 2 kids, Jamie, who was 8, and little Sophia, barely 5. The pay was good, $50 plus whatever leftovers they had in the fridge, and the kids were usually asleep by 9 anyway. I remember thinking it would be the easiest money I'd ever make, just sitting there watching Netflix while handing out candy to trick-or-treaters. The Bradshaws left around 7:30, Mrs. Bradshaw doing that typical parent thing, where she wrote down 5 different phone numbers, even though I already had her cell saved in my contacts. The kids were hyped up on pre-Halloween candy their grandma had sent them, running around in their costumes. Jamie was some superhero I didn't recognize, and Sophia was a princess with a tiara that kept sliding off her head. I managed to corral them onto the couch with the promise of watching Hocus Pocus, and for about an hour, everything was completely normal. Trick-or-treaters came in waves, groups of kids with pillowcases and plastic pumpkins, parents hovering at the end of the driveway with flashlights. I was actually enjoying myself, remembering how much fun Halloween used to be when I was their age, before everything got complicated with college applications and part-time jobs and all that adult stuff that suddenly seemed to matter so much. Around 9 o'clock, after I'd gotten both kids into their pajamas and tucked into Jamie's room, Sophia insisted on sleeping in her brother's bed during scary nights. I noticed this person in a clown costume standing at the corner of the property, right where the Bradshaw's lawn met the sidewalk. At first, I didn't think much of it. Halloween brings out all kinds of weird costumes, and teenagers especially love going overboard with the creepy stuff. But this clown wasn't moving with a group, wasn't carrying a candy bag, wasn't doing anything really except standing there. The costume itself was disturbing in its simplicity, a dirty white jumpsuit with pom-poms down the front, and this mask that even from the living room window I could tell was different from the cheap ones they sell at party stores. The features were too elongated, the smile too wide, painted in this faded red that looked brown under the streetlight. I texted my boyfriend Nathan around 9:15. "There's this creepy clown outside the house I'm babysitting at. He's just standing there." Nathan, being Nathan, immediately called me instead of texting back, and I remember whispering into the phone even though the kids were upstairs and couldn't hear me. He told me to call the cops if the guy didn't leave soon, but I felt stupid making that call. What was I going to say that someone in a Halloween costume was standing on a public sidewalk? While I was talking to Nathan, I walked from room to room, checking all the windows, and that's when I realized the clown wasn't just standing in one spot anymore. He was walking a slow circle around the house, maintaining the same distance from the walls, like he was tracing some invisible boundary. Each window I looked through, I'd catch a glimpse of him passing by, that mask turning slightly toward the house each time, never fully facing forward, always keeping the house in his peripheral vision. Nathan stayed on the phone with me for another 20 minutes, and during that time, the clown completed maybe 3 full circles around the house. I started timing them. Each lap took about 6 minutes, always the same pace, never speeding up or slowing down. The trick-or-treaters had thinned out by then, just the occasional group of older kids without costumes looking for last-minute candy, and none of them seemed to notice or care about the clown. I kept thinking maybe it was some elaborate prank. Maybe one of the Bradshaw's neighbors hired someone to add atmosphere to the neighborhood or something. But there was something mechanical about his movement, something practiced and deliberate that made my chest feel tight. I told Nathan I was going to try something, and I turned off the porch light, the universal signal that we were out of candy. The clown stopped mid-stride when the light went out, stood perfectly still for maybe 10 seconds, then continued his circle like nothing had happened. By 9:45, I was genuinely scared. I double-checked all the locks, closed all the curtains except for a small gap I was using to watch him, and I'd moved into the kitchen where I could see both the front and back doors. Nathan was trying to keep me calm, suggesting maybe the guy was high or drunk, just some weirdo who would eventually get bored and leave. But then I noticed something that made me actually gasp out loud. The clown had something in his hand that I hadn't seen before, or maybe he'd just pulled it out. It was a phone, and he was holding it up, not like he was texting or calling someone, but like he was recording. He was filming the house as he walked, the phone's screen casting this sick blue glow on the lower part of his mask. I immediately thought about the kids upstairs, about how their room faced the street, and I ran up to make sure their curtains were closed. They were both sleeping soundly, Jamie sprawled out with one arm hanging off the bed, Sophia curled up against him sucking her thumb. I stood there for a moment, listening to their breathing, wondering if I should wake them up and bring them downstairs with me. I decided against waking the kids. They were safer not knowing what was happening, I figured. When I got back to the kitchen, Nathan was practically yelling through the phone, asking if I was okay because I'd gone quiet for too long. I told him about the filming, and that's when he said he was coming over. He lived about 15 minutes away, and I remember feeling both relieved and more anxious somehow, like his coming over made this whole thing more real, more serious. I gave him the address again, even though he'd dropped me off there before, and then I went back to my spot by the kitchen window. The clown had changed his pattern. Instead of walking continuous circles, he would now stop at each corner of the house and stand there for exactly 30 seconds. I counted, before moving to the next corner. At each stop, he would slowly turn his head from left to right. That phone held steady, recording everything. 10:13 is when everything went wrong. I remember the exact time because I was texting Nathan asking how far away he was, and he said he was parking down the street because he didn't want to pull into the driveway and potentially escalate things with the clown. I was typing back, "Please hurry," when I heard the basement door open. Not the outside basement door, the one inside the house, the one that connected the basement to the hallway near the bathroom. My whole body went rigid. The Bradshaws had mentioned that door sometimes didn't latch properly, that you really had to push it closed, but I knew I hadn't been in the basement at all that night. I stood there in the kitchen, phone in one hand, a knife from the drawer in the other. When had I grabbed that? Listening to footsteps that were definitely coming from inside the house. Slow, deliberate steps, not trying to be quiet exactly, but not making extra noise either. The footsteps stopped at the bottom of the main stairs, the ones that led up to where the kids were sleeping, and I knew I had to move. I dropped my phone on the kitchen counter. It made this awful clattering sound that seemed impossibly loud, and ran for the stairs. My socks slipped on the hardwood floor as I rounded the corner, and I could hear those footsteps behind me now, faster, taking the stairs 2 at a time. I burst into Jamie's room and slammed the door behind me, turning the lock with shaking fingers. The kids woke up confused, Sophia starting to cry, and I pulled them both into Jamie's closet, whispering that we were playing a game, a Halloween game where we had to hide really quietly. Jamie was old enough to know something was wrong, his eyes wide in the darkness of the closet, but he held his sister tight and didn't say a word. Through the closet door, I could hear footsteps in the hallway, slow again, stopping at each door. The handle of Jamie's room jiggled once, twice, then nothing. Just breathing on the other side of the door, raspy and deliberately loud, like whoever it was wanted us to know they were there. The silence stretched out for what felt like hours but was probably only 2 or 3 minutes. Then I heard Nathan's voice from downstairs, shouting my name, saying the front door was wide open. The footsteps in the hallway moved fast then, running toward the stairs, and I heard Nathan yell something I couldn't make out, followed by what sounded like furniture falling over. I wanted to leave the closet, wanted to help, but Sophia was clinging to me so tight I could barely breathe, and Jamie was whispering, "Don't leave us, please don't leave us," over and over. We heard more crashing, the sound of glass breaking, Nathan's voice getting more distant like he was chasing someone outside. Then suddenly everything went quiet. Not normal quiet, that awful, heavy kind of quiet where you can hear your own heartbeat and nothing else. I kept the kids in that closet for another 15 minutes, until we heard sirens and saw red and blue lights flashing through the bedroom window. Only then did I open the closet door, carrying Sophia while Jamie held onto the back of my shirt, and we made our way downstairs to where 2 police officers were standing in the destroyed living room. Nathan sitting on the couch with a bloody nose, and no sign of anyone in a clown costume anywhere. The police searched the entire neighborhood that night, but they never found whoever was in that clown costume. Nathan told them he'd chased the person through the backyard and into the wooded area behind the houses, but lost them in the darkness. The really disturbing part came when they checked the basement. The lock on the exterior basement door had been picked, and there were muddy footprints showing someone had been down there for a while, maybe even before I arrived that evening. They found my phone in the kitchen where I'd left it, still recording a video I didn't remember starting. When the detective played it back, you could hear me talking to Nathan, then the door opening, my footsteps running, and then about 4 minutes of just breathing. That same raspy breathing I'd heard outside Jamie's door. The Bradshaws came home to find their house swarming with police, and Mrs. Bradshaw just held her kids and cried, while Mr. Bradshaw kept apologizing to me, like any of this was somehow their fault. They moved out 3 months later, said they couldn't stand being in that house anymore. For years I had nightmares about that mask, about those mechanical circles around the house, about what would have happened if Nathan hadn't shown up when he did. I moved away for college, tried to put it all behind me, but Halloween always brought it back. Then, about 2 years ago, I got a call from Nathan. He still lived in our hometown, had actually bought a house about 6 blocks from where the Bradshaws used to live. He was doing some landscaping in his backyard, planning to put in a pool, when his shovel hit something hard about 3 feet down. It was wrapped in plastic, a garbage bag duct taped into a bundle. Inside was that clown mask, unmistakable with its elongated features and faded red smile, along with a white jumpsuit and something else that made Nathan call the police immediately, a notebook filled with addresses, dates, and detailed observations about families in the neighborhood. The Bradshaws' address was there, along with notes about their schedule, their kids' names, my name, what time I usually arrived and left. But here's what still keeps me up at night. Their entry was from 2016, but the newest entries were from just weeks before Nathan found it. Someone had been using that same mask, that same method, still watching families, still taking notes. The police took everything as evidence, but they never found who buried it there. Nathan sold that house within a month, didn't even wait to get his asking price. Neither of us talks about it anymore, but every Halloween, we text each other just to check in, just to make sure we're both okay, both safe, both nowhere near any windows where someone might be walking slow circles outside, recording everything, waiting for the right moment to test a basement door. Halloween 2022 changed everything for me. I was a senior at the state university, majoring in journalism, and I'd been covering campus stories for the student paper since freshman year. That October night started like any other Halloween weekend. Costume parties everywhere, drunk students stumbling around downtown, the usual chaos. I wasn't even supposed to be working that night, but our regular photographer, Kevin, had called in sick at the last minute. The editor asked if I could cover the big costume party at the Vault, this converted bank building that served as the hottest club near campus. I grabbed my camera, threw on a lazy vampire costume, just fangs and a cape over regular clothes, and headed downtown around 10 p.m. The streets were packed with zombies, witches, superheroes, everyone trying to outdo each other with their costumes. The party was exactly what you'd expect. Wall-to-wall people, terrible music, overpriced drinks. I spent about 2 hours taking photos of costume contest winners and drunk kids making fools of themselves. Around midnight, I noticed this guy in an incredibly detailed plague doctor mask. You know, those bird-like masks with the long beaks that medieval doctors wore during the Black Death. But this wasn't some cheap Halloween store version. The leather looked aged and authentic, with brass fixtures and glass eyepieces that reflected the strobe lights in this unsettling way. He was tall, maybe 6'2", wearing a long black coat that seemed way too heavy for the warm October weather we were having. What really caught my attention was how he moved through the crowd. People seemed to unconsciously step aside when he walked by, creating this bubble of space around him that felt wrong in such a packed venue. I raised my camera to get a shot of the costume, but when I looked through the viewfinder, he was staring directly at me through those glass lenses. I lowered the camera and he was gone, just vanished into the crowd like smoke. That should have been my first warning, but I brushed it off. People move fast in clubs, especially when they're drunk. I kept shooting photos for another hour until I ran into my roommate Jordan, who was dressed as some anime character I didn't recognize. He was completely wasted, barely able to stand, and his girlfriend Melissa was trying to convince him to leave. She asked if I could help her get him back to our apartment since it was on my way home anyway. We basically carried Jordan out of the club around 1:30 a.m., each of us supporting one of his arms while he mumbled about wanting pizza. The downtown area was still buzzing with people, but as we turned onto Riverside Avenue, the crowds thinned out. That's when I saw the plague doctor again, standing under a streetlight about a block ahead of us, perfectly still, facing our direction. Melissa noticed him too and made some joke about creepy dudes on Halloween, but something about the way he stood there made my chest tighten. We turned down Crawford Street to avoid walking past him. It was a shortcut anyway, cutting through this older part of downtown where they hadn't updated the streetlights yet. The street was darker than usual because several lights were out, and the shadows from the working ones created these long, distorted shapes on the pavement. Jordan had gone quiet, his head lolling forward as we dragged him along. About halfway down the block, Melissa's phone rang, her sister calling to make sure she got home safe. She let go of Jordan to answer, and I had to grab him with both arms to keep him from falling. That's when I heard footsteps behind us, slow and deliberate, the sound of heavy boots on concrete. I turned around and saw that plague doctor mask again, maybe 30 feet back, just walking steadily in our direction. I told Melissa we needed to move faster, but she was still on the phone, not paying attention. Jordan chose that exact moment to throw up all over his anime costume and my shoes, the smell of cheap beer and whatever he'd eaten hitting me instantly. While I was trying to keep him upright and not gag myself, Melissa finally hung up and started freaking out about Jordan's condition. We needed to stop and let him catch his breath, so we propped him against a brick wall next to this abandoned print shop that had been closed for years. The windows were boarded up with plywood that had graffiti tags I recognized from around campus. I kept glancing back, but the plague doctor had stopped too, maintaining that same 30-foot distance, just standing there in the middle of the sidewalk. The weird part was how patient he seemed, not approaching, not leaving, just waiting. Under the broken streetlight, I could barely make out his silhouette, but those glass eyepieces somehow caught what little light there was, creating 2 pinpoints of reflection that never moved away from us. Melissa was digging through her purse for tissues to clean Jordan up when we heard voices coming from the other end of Crawford Street. A group of people laughing and singing, probably heading home from another party. Relief washed through me because witnesses meant safety, right? But as the group got closer, I realized they were all wearing masks too. A wolf, a Jason hockey mask, something that looked like melted flesh, and another plague doctor mask, though cheaper looking than the one following us. They walked past us without acknowledging we were there, even though Jordan was actively dry heaving against the wall, and Melissa was practically yelling at him to drink some water. The group just flowed around us like we were invisible, their laughter continuing uninterrupted. When I looked back again, our plague doctor had moved closer, maybe 15 feet now, and two more figures had joined him, both in different but equally elaborate masks. One looked like a Victorian porcelain doll face. The other was some kind of demon with curved horns. That's when panic really set in. I grabbed Jordan under his arms and basically started dragging him forward while Melissa kept asking what was wrong. I couldn't form words to explain that 3 people in masks were following us and getting closer with each passing second. We stumbled forward, Jordan's feet barely helping, his weight making every step a struggle. The end of Crawford Street opened onto Washington Boulevard, where there should have been traffic, more people, safety. But when we reached the intersection, the usually busy boulevard was completely empty. No cars, no pedestrians, no sound except our own ragged breathing and Jordan's incoherent mumbling. The traffic lights were still changing from green to yellow to red, illuminating the empty asphalt in shifting colors, but there was nothing to direct. I could hear those footsteps getting closer, multiple sets now, no longer trying to match our pace but gaining on us. Melissa finally turned around and saw them. Her scream cut through the silence like breaking glass. We ran, or tried to run with Jordan barely conscious between us. We made it maybe half a block down Washington before Jordan's legs completely gave out and we had to stop. The masked figures had spread out behind us, no longer walking in a group but forming a semicircle that was slowly closing in. That's when I noticed others stepping out from doorways and alleys ahead of us. More masks, different styles but all elaborate and disturbing. A cracked baby doll face with one eye missing, a leather mask with zippers for features, something that looked like exposed muscle and sinew. They moved with this horrible synchronization, like they'd rehearsed this exact scenario. Melissa was crying, begging them to leave us alone, offering money, her phone, anything. But they never spoke, never made any sound except their footsteps. The original plague doctor raised one gloved hand and pointed at Jordan, then made a beckoning motion with his fingers. The message was clear. They wanted him. I don't know what made me do it, but I pulled out my phone and started recording video, thinking maybe evidence would help later, maybe someone would believe us. Through the screen, I saw something that made my knees weak. Jordan wasn't Jordan anymore. Where my roommate's face should have been, there was a blank, smooth surface, like skin stretched over where features should be. No eyes, no mouth, no nose, just flesh-colored nothing. Melissa saw my phone screen and looked down at what we were holding between us. Her scream this time was different, raw terror mixed with confusion. But when I looked directly at Jordan without the phone, his face was normal again, drunk and pale, but definitely there. I lifted the phone back up and through the camera, that horrible blank face returned. The masked figures had stopped moving, apparently waiting for us to understand something. I switched to the front-facing camera and nearly dropped the phone. Melissa and I looked normal, but behind us, the street wasn't Crawford anymore. Through the phone screen, we were standing in some kind of warehouse or factory, with rusted metal walls and industrial equipment I couldn't identify. The plague doctor tilted his head, almost like he was amused, then reached up and removed his mask. Underneath was just a normal guy, maybe late 20s, with stubble and tired eyes. One by one, the others removed their masks too. Regular people, different ages, different ethnicities, but all with this exhausted, resigned expression. The man who'd worn the plague doctor mask spoke for the first time, his voice rough like he hadn't used it in a while. "He's already gone." Has been since you left the club. What you're carrying is just an echo and it's drawing them here. Every Halloween, they send out echoes wearing faces, looking for specific people. You can keep dragging that thing around, but it's not your friend anymore." He pulled out an old flip phone, checked the time, and continued. "In about 3 minutes, that echo is going to walk back to where it came from, and if you're still holding on to it when it does, you'll go too. We've been trying to warn people for years, but the masks are the only way we can see each other. The only way we can move through the spaces where the echoes hunt." Melissa was sobbing, saying this was insane, that Jordan was right there. We could see him. But I believed the man because something deep in my gut had been screaming wrongness since we'd left the club. The plague doctor man tossed me a rubber Halloween mask, a cheap werewolf one from a dollar store. "Put it on and look at your friend again," he said. "Then decide if you want to let go." With shaking fingers, I pulled the mask over my head. Through the eye holes, Jordan wasn't there at all. Just a column of static, like television snow in human shape, and where his feet should have touched the ground, there was nothing, just empty space. Worse, I could see thin, translucent threads extending from the static thing into both Melissa and me, wrapped around our wrists like fishing line. The masked people weren't people anymore either. Through the werewolf mask, they looked like burn victims, with melted, scarred skin and missing pieces, but their eyes were kind, desperate even. 60 seconds, the man said, his voice distorted now through my mask-filtered perception. "Drop it and run. Don't look back, don't go home tonight, and whatever you do, don't answer if someone calls your name." Melissa and I let go of Jordan at the same time. The moment we did, the static thing stood perfectly upright on its own, turned and began walking back toward Crawford Street with mechanical precision. We ran in the opposite direction, our feet slapping against wet pavement I didn't remember being wet before. Behind us, I heard the masked people scattering, their footsteps fading in different directions. We ran for blocks until we reached the 24-hour diner on Peachtree. Bright lights and normal people everywhere. Melissa collapsed in a booth, hyperventilating, while I called 911 to report Jordan missing. The police found him 3 hours later, wandering downtown in his ruined costume with no memory of anything after midnight. He was fine, completely fine, except for one thing. He swore he'd been at his parents' house in Ohio the whole time, that he'd never even come back to campus after fall break. Security footage from the vault showed him at the party, but every camera that should have caught him on Crawford Street just showed static from 1:47 to 1:50 a.m. The really screwed up part? When I developed the photos from my camera the next day, every shot I'd taken of the plague doctor at the club showed a different person's face in that mask. And in the background of each one, there was always someone in a regular Halloween mask watching. I'd been counting down the days until I could leave my hometown since junior year of high school, and finally making it to State University felt like stepping into a whole different world. I'd been there for about 2 months when Halloween rolled around, and I was still that awkward freshman who ate most of her meals alone in the dining hall. My roommate had gone home for the weekend, leaving me with nothing but a pile of homework and a bag of fun-sized Snickers I'd bought for myself. I was sitting in the library that afternoon, October 31st, trying to focus on my psychology textbook when these 3 girls from my English Lit class approached my table. We'd done a group project together a few weeks earlier, but I wouldn't say we were friends, just the kind of acquaintances who smile and wave when you pass each other on campus. The one who did most of the talking was Ashley, this bubbly blonde who always wore designer everything, and somehow managed to look put together even at 8 in the morning. She leaned against my table and asked if I had plans for tonight, and when I said no, her face lit up like she'd just won something. They were going to this exclusive Halloween party at a house off campus, she explained, and the host specifically asked them to bring more people because a bunch of guests had canceled last minute. The other 2 girls, whose names I'm pretty sure were Chloe and Madison, but I honestly couldn't remember for certain, stood behind her nodding and smiling. Ashley showed me the address on her phone, 47882 Garrison Road, about 15 minutes from campus, and said to be there at 9, costume optional since it was such short notice. I remember feeling this little spark of excitement, thinking maybe this was finally my chance to break into the social scene I'd been watching from the sidelines. Around 4 that afternoon, I was walking from the library to my dorm when I noticed this guy behind me. He had on a gray hoodie with the hood up, dark jeans, and these beat-up red Converse that made this weird squeaking sound every few steps. At first I didn't think much of it. Campus was always crowded. But then I took a detour through the student union to grab a coffee, and when I came out 20 minutes later, there he was again, maybe 30 feet behind me. Same squeaky shoes, same hunched way of walking, like he was trying to make himself smaller. I ducked into the campus bookstore and pretended to browse the school spirit section for a good 10 minutes, watching the entrance through the corner of my eye. He never came in, and when I finally left, I didn't see him anywhere. I convinced myself I was being paranoid, that it was just some student who happened to be going the same direction. I spent way too long getting ready that night, changing outfits 3 times before settling on black jeans and this vintage band tee I'd found at a thrift store, figuring it was casual enough not to look like I was trying too hard but still appropriate for a party. The Uber driver had trouble finding the address at first, driving up and down Garrison Road twice before finally spotting the house numbers hidden behind an overgrown hedge. The house itself was one of those modern rental places that looked like it belonged in a magazine. All glass and sharp angles, with those automatic lights that turn on when you walk up the driveway. Music was thumping from inside, but something seemed weird about the windows. They all had these heavy blackout curtains drawn tight, not a single gap to see inside. Ashley's white BMW was parked out front though, or at least I thought it was hers. Same model, same sorority sticker on the back windshield. So I paid the driver and headed up to the front door. The door opened before I could even knock, and there was Madison wearing cat ears and holding a red Solo cup, giving me this huge smile that didn't quite reach her eyes. The music was louder inside, but not party loud. More like someone had just turned on a playlist to fill the silence, and the living room only had maybe 12 people scattered around, not the packed party I'd been expecting. Ashley waved from across the room where she was talking to some guy I didn't recognize, and Chloe was nowhere to be seen. The house had that sterile feel of a rental. Generic artwork on the walls, no family photos, that kind of aggressively neutral furniture that's meant to offend nobody and ends up feeling like nobody lives there at all. Madison handed me a drink without asking what I wanted, something pink and way too sweet that burned going down, and started introducing me to people whose names immediately slipped out of my head because I was too busy trying to figure out why everyone seemed to be watching me without actually looking directly at me. That's when I saw him in the kitchen, leaning against the counter and peeling the label off a beer bottle with his thumbnail. The guy from earlier, still in the same gray hoodie, those red Converse visible even from across the room. My whole body went rigid, and I must have made some kind of noise because Madison grabbed my arm and asked if I was okay, her fingers pressing harder than necessary into my skin. I tried to casually ask who he was, and she got this confused look and said his name was Brandon, Ashley's cousin from out of town who'd crashed the party last minute. But here's the thing. When I'd done that group project with Ashley, she'd spent half the time complaining about being an only child with no cousins, no extended family at all, just her and her divorced parents. I excused myself to find the bathroom, needing a minute to think, and Madison pointed down a hallway saying it was the last door on the right, still gripping my arm like she didn't want to let go. The hallway was darker than it should have been, with only one dim bulb at the far end, and I passed 3 closed doors before reaching the bathroom. Inside, I locked the door and immediately tried calling my roommate, but my phone had no signal, not even 1 bar, which made no sense because we were still in the city. I tried connecting to Wi-Fi, but the only network that showed up was password protected with a name that was just random numbers and letters. My heart was hammering so hard I could hear it in my ears, and when I splashed cold water on my face, I noticed my reflection looked wrong in the mirror. It was one of those 2-way mirrors, the kind where the reflection seems slightly darker, slightly off. I pressed my face close to the glass, cupping my hands around my eyes, and I swear I could see the faint outline of a room on the other side. That's when I heard footsteps stop right outside the bathroom door, and someone tried the handle, jiggling it when they found it locked. "Everything okay in there?" It was a man's voice I didn't recognize. Definitely not Brandon's, because I'd heard him talking to someone when I'd walked past the kitchen. The handle jiggled again, more insistent this time, and then I heard keys jingling. Keys. Why would someone have keys to the bathroom at a party? I looked around frantically for another exit, but there was just a tiny window above the shower, barely big enough for a cat to squeeze through. "Just a minute," I called out, trying to keep my voice steady while I opened the bathroom cabinet, searching for anything I could use as a weapon. Nothing but toilet paper and cleaning supplies. The key sound stopped, followed by whispering I couldn't make out, and then footsteps walking away. I waited another full minute before cracking the door open, and the hallway was empty, but now all three of those previously closed doors were standing wide open, revealing dark rooms that seemed to be watching me. I knew I had to get out of that house immediately. But when I walked back toward the living room, the layout seemed different somehow. The hallway felt longer, and there was a turn I didn't remember taking before. The music had stopped completely, replaced by this low murmur of voices that sounded rehearsed, like people reading from a script. When I finally reached the living room, everyone had rearranged themselves. They were all sitting now, facing the front door in these neat little rows like they were waiting for something. Ashley stood up when she saw me, that same bright smile plastered on her face, and announced to the room that I was ready. Ready for what? I tried to head for the door, but two guys I hadn't noticed before stepped in front of it. Both of them bigger than football players, just standing there with their arms crossed. Brandon had moved from the kitchen and was now sitting on the arm of a couch, those red sneakers tapping against the floor in this rhythm that made my teeth hurt. "Your Uber already left," Ashley said, walking toward me with her phone in her hand, showing me the app like that proved something. "But don't worry, we've arranged another ride for you." That's when I noticed everyone else had their phones out too. All of them pointed at me, recording. The little red lights on their screens looked like eyes in the dim room, and I realized with absolute clarity that whatever they had planned, they wanted it documented. I backed up until I hit the wall, my mind racing through options. The back door, but I could see through to the kitchen where three more people were standing guard. The windows, but those blackout curtains were probably there for a reason, and even if I could get through one, I had no idea what was on the other side. Madison and Chloe flanked Ashley now, all three of them moving closer in this synchronized way that made them look like hunters who'd done this before. "We've been watching you for weeks," Ashley said, her voice different now, emptied of that fake sweetness. "You walk the same routes, eat at the same places, sit in the same spot in the library. You made it so easy." That's when I did the only thing I could think of. I grabbed the lamp from the side table next to me, this heavy ceramic thing shaped like a pineapple, and hurled it straight through the front window. The glass exploded outward with this incredible crash that seemed to snap everyone out of their choreographed movements for just a second. And in that second, I ran. Not toward the window I'd just broken, they'd expect that, but straight at the two guys blocking the door, screaming at the top of my lungs this primal sound I didn't know I could make. They hesitated, probably not expecting the quiet library girl to charge them like a linebacker, and I dropped down at the last second, sliding between them on the polished floor. My knee hit the door hard, but adrenaline is a hell of a drug, and I was up and fumbling with the deadbolt before they could grab me. The door flew open and I burst out into the night, still screaming, and that's what saved me: the neighbors. Turns out the house next door was having their own Halloween party. A real one, with 40 or 50 people who came pouring out when they heard the window break and me screaming like I was being murdered. Brandon tried to follow me out, but stopped dead when he saw all those people streaming across the lawn, some of them already on their phones calling 911. I collapsed on the neighbor's driveway, sobbing and trying to explain what had happened, but I didn't need to convince them. They could see Ashley and her group standing in the doorway of the house, all of them still holding their phones, looking like kids caught doing something terrible. The police showed up within minutes, and that's when everything unraveled fast. Turns out the house was an Airbnb rented with a stolen credit card. Ashley and the other two girls weren't even students at State University, and Brandon, his real name was Colin, had a record for assault and was violating parole just by being in the state. They found cameras hidden throughout the house, streaming to some website I don't even want to know about. The whole thing was apparently part of some sick streaming game, where people pay to watch staged scenarios with unsuspecting victims. The police said I was lucky. 2 other girls from different colleges had reported similar setups that month, but they hadn't been able to prove anything because the perpetrators always cleaned up and disappeared. This time, they'd gotten sloppy, too confident. They're all in prison now, and I had to testify at the trial, which was its own kind of nightmare. But at least it's over. I finished my freshman year, though I changed dorms and vary my routes everywhere I go now. I still can't hear squeaky shoes without feeling sick, and I definitely don't accept party invitations from anyone I don't know well. But I survived, and that's what matters. Sometimes that's all you can do, survive and make sure the bastards don't get to do it to anyone else. Halloween night 2018 will permanently live in my brain as the night I realized how vulnerable we really are in our own homes. I was 27 at the time, living with my girlfriend Vanessa in a small 2-bedroom rental house in Springfield, Massachusetts. We'd been together for about 3 years, and life was pretty normal. I worked as an insurance adjuster, she was a dental hygienist, and we had this comfortable routine where we'd cook dinner together most nights and watch terrible reality TV shows until we passed out on the couch. The house itself wasn't anything special, just one of those cookie-cutter builds from the 70s with thin walls and creaky floors. But it was ours for the time being. That Halloween fell on a Wednesday, and Vanessa had been excited about this new Italian place that opened downtown, so we'd made reservations weeks in advance. I remember she wore this deep purple dress that she'd been saving for a special occasion, and I'd actually ironed a button-down shirt for once, which she'd joked about all evening. We left around 6:30, right when the trick-or-treaters were starting to come around, and I'd left our porch light off since we wouldn't be home to hand out candy anyway. Dinner was fantastic. We're talking homemade pasta, wine that was probably too expensive for our budget, and this tiramisu that Vanessa kept saying she wanted to recreate at home. The restaurant had this cozy, dimly lit atmosphere, with fake cobwebs hung up for the holiday, and our waiter was wearing vampire fangs that kept slipping when he talked, which made us laugh every time he came to our table. We stayed longer than we'd planned, probably until around 9:30 or so, just enjoying each other's company without our phones or the TV as a distraction. The drive home took about 15 minutes, and I remember the streets were pretty much empty by then. Most of the kids had gone home, and the neighborhood had that eerie post-Halloween quiet where you could see decorations swaying in people's yards but no actual people anywhere. When we pulled into our driveway, I noticed our next-door neighbor's house was completely dark, which was unusual because old Mr. Brennan usually stayed up late watching his police procedurals with the volume way too loud. Vanessa was humming some song from the restaurant's playlist as we walked up to our front door, and I was fishing for my keys in my jacket pocket, thinking about how I was definitely going to need to take some antacids before bed because of all that rich food. The first thing that hit me when I opened the door was this weird smell. Not terrible, but distinct, like someone had been eating cheap chocolate and those sour gummy candies that kids go crazy for. I stepped inside and flicked on the living room light, and that's when my brain started trying to make sense of what I was seeing. There were candy wrappers everywhere, and I mean everywhere. Snickers wrappers on the coffee table, empty Kit Kat packages on the couch, those little fun-size Milky Way wrappers scattered across our area rug like confetti. My first thought was that maybe we'd left a window open and some bold raccoon had gotten in because we'd had issues with them getting into our trash before. But then I noticed our back door, the one that leads to our tiny excuse for a backyard, was open about 6 inches. Not wide open, not broken or forced, just open, like someone had stepped out for a second and forgotten to close it all the way. Vanessa came in behind me and immediately grabbed my arm, her fingernails digging into my jacket sleeve. "What the hell?" she whispered, and I could hear her voice shaking a little. I told her to stay by the front door while I checked it out, trying to sound way more confident than I actually felt. I walked through the living room carefully, stepping over the wrappers and trying to listen for any sounds. Our house was old enough that you couldn't walk anywhere without the floors announcing your presence, so I was making these soft creaking noises with every step, which made it even harder to hear anything else. The back door was definitely unlocked. I could see the deadbolt was turned to the open position, which meant someone had unlocked it from the inside, not forced it. That detail stuck with me because I'm obsessive about locking doors. Always have been. And I know for a fact I'd checked that door before we left. I pushed it open wider with my foot and looked out into the backyard, but it was just darkness and the vague shapes of our pathetic attempt at a garden that had mostly died by September. The motion sensor light we'd installed last spring should have been on, but it wasn't, and I realized someone must have unscrewed the bulb because I could see it was missing from the socket. That's when the situation started feeling a lot less like dumb kids pulled a prank and a lot more like someone planned this. I came back inside and locked the door, sliding the deadbolt as quietly as I could. And that's when I saw the light coming from under the guest room door down the hallway. We never used that room. It was basically storage. Boxes of Vanessa's college textbooks, my old golf clubs that I kept pretending I'd use again, winter clothes in plastic bins, that kind of stuff. The light in there was one of those weak overhead fixtures with a pull chain, and we never turned it on because there was no reason to. I felt this wave of adrenaline hit me, the kind that makes your hearing go sharp and your muscles tense up like you're about to sprint or fight. I motioned for Vanessa to stay back, and I grabbed this heavy Maglite flashlight we kept by the back door. Not because I needed light, but because it was the closest thing to a weapon I had within reach. As I got closer to that door, maybe 10 feet away, I heard it. Breathing. Not heavy, not labored, just the quiet, rhythmic sound of someone trying very hard to stay still and silent. It was coming from inside that room, and whoever it was wasn't doing a great job of staying quiet, because I could hear this faint whistling sound on the exhale, like their nose was stuffy or they'd been running. My brain was racing through possibilities. Maybe it was a kid who'd gotten scared and was hiding. Maybe it was some homeless person who'd found a way in and was just trying to survive the cold night. Maybe it was someone high on drugs who didn't even know where they were. But then I heard a small mechanical sound, like a phone vibrating on silent mode, and the breathing stopped completely. Whoever was in there had just gotten a message or notification, and they were now aware that we were home, and probably knew we'd heard them. The silence that followed was worse than the breathing, because it meant they were listening for us, just as intently as we were listening for them. Vanessa had moved closer despite my warning, and she was standing maybe 5 feet behind me, her phone already open to the 911 screen, with her thumb hovering over the call button. I could see her face in the glow of her screen. She was pale, her jaw clenched, eyes wide but focused. I remember thinking how crazy it was that we were standing in our own hallway, in our own house, afraid of a door we opened and closed 100 times before. I raised my voice, trying to sound authoritative, but hearing it come out shakier than I wanted, and said something like, "We've already called the police, they're on their way, you need to come out now." Complete bluff, obviously, but I didn't know what else to do. For maybe 10 seconds, nothing happened. Then I heard movement. Not toward the door, but away from it, like shuffling footsteps moving toward the window on the far side of the room. That window. I knew that window didn't open easily because the frame had warped over time, and we'd never bothered to fix it since we didn't use that room anyway, which meant whoever was in there had probably come in through the back door, not the window, and was now trapped unless they wanted to confront us directly. I heard them struggling with the window, the scraping sound of wood against wood as they tried to force it up. Vanessa whispered urgently behind me, "Call them, actually call them right now," and I heard her fingers tapping on her screen. She spoke in this low, controlled voice to the dispatcher, giving our address and saying there was an intruder in our home, still inside. We could hear them. The dispatcher told her to get out of the house immediately, don't engage, wait outside for the officers. But Vanessa just said, okay, and didn't move an inch. We both stood there, frozen in this awful moment of decision. Do we run outside and risk them getting away, or do we stay and potentially trap them until the cops arrive? The window finally gave way with this loud crack, and I heard it slide up. I made a split-second choice and rushed to the door, throwing it open and hitting the light switch, flooding the room with that harsh overhead light. What I saw has been burned into my memory ever since. It was a man, probably mid-30s, wearing a stained gray hoodie and jeans that were too big for him, one leg already out the window. He turned and looked directly at me, and his face, God, his face was just so ordinary. Brown hair, patchy stubble, dark circles under his eyes like he hadn't slept in days. He wasn't some masked monster or deranged lunatic. He just looked tired and desperate and caught. Our eyes met for maybe 2 seconds, but it felt longer. And in that moment, I saw something that genuinely unnerved me more than if he'd been aggressive. He looked disappointed, like a kid who'd been caught doing something they knew was wrong. There were more candy wrappers around his feet, and I noticed he'd been sitting in our desk chair, which he'd pulled over to face the door, like he'd been waiting there, eating Halloween candy and just listening to us on the other side. He had a backpack next to the chair, unzipped, and I could see what looked like Vanessa's jewelry box inside, along with my laptop that I'd left on the desk in our bedroom. He didn't say anything, just stared at me for another second, then pulled his other leg through the window and dropped down into our backyard. I heard the thud of him landing, then the sound of him scrambling over our chain-link fence into the alley behind our house. I ran to the window and looked out, but he was already gone, swallowed up by the darkness between houses. My whole body was shaking, not from fear exactly, but from this cocktail of adrenaline and anger and this bizarre relief that he was gone and hadn't hurt us. Vanessa appeared in the doorway, still on the phone with the dispatcher, and she looked into the room and saw the chair positioned like that, facing the door, and I watched her face change. She got it immediately, understood what I'd just understood. He'd been sitting there listening to us, maybe for minutes before we even knew he was there. Maybe he'd heard us come in, heard us talking in the living room, and just sat there in the dark deciding what to do. That thought made me feel violated in a way that the stolen stuff didn't. The police showed up maybe 6 minutes later, which felt like an eternity, but was apparently pretty fast for our area. 2 officers, one older guy who looked like he'd seen everything, and a younger woman who actually seemed really engaged with what we were telling them. They checked the whole house room by room, looked at the window he'd escaped through, examined the back door and the missing light bulb. The older cop, Officer Dennings, told us it was likely someone who'd been watching the house, knew we'd gone out for the evening, and had probably been inside for at least an hour or more based on the amount of candy wrappers. He pointed out that the guy had eaten maybe 20 or 30 pieces, which takes time, and he'd clearly gone through our bedroom since he had my laptop. The younger officer, her name tag said Alvarez, she's the one who asked the question that made everything click into place. How did he get in? Was the back door unlocked when you left? I told her no, absolutely not. I'm obsessive about locking up. She went back to examine the door more carefully with a flashlight, and when she came back, her expression was serious. There's no sign of forced entry, she said. No scratches on the lock, no damage to the frame. Whoever came in had a key. That statement hit me like a punch to the chest. A key. My mind immediately went to all the people who'd had access to our house. The landlord, obviously, and his maintenance guy who'd fixed our water heater last spring. We'd given a spare to Vanessa's sister for emergencies, but she lived 2 hours away, and we'd just seen her the previous weekend. I'd also lent our key to our friend Austin when we went on vacation in July, so he could water our plants and grab our mail, and he'd given it back, or at least I thought he had. Vanessa was going through the same mental checklist, and I could see panic building in her eyes. Officer Alvarez asked us to make a list of everyone who'd ever had a key, even temporarily, and to call our landlord to find out if anyone else had access to the spare keys he kept. The officers took photos of everything, bagged a few of the candy wrappers as evidence in case they caught the guy, and needed to place him at the scene, and gave us a case number. Dennings told us bluntly that we needed to change our locks immediately, first thing tomorrow morning, and to seriously consider getting a security system. Before they left, Alvarez mentioned that there'd been a small uptick in break-ins in our neighborhood over the past month, all of them while residents were out, none of them violent, mostly just theft. But she said ours was the first one where the intruder was caught inside and the first where there was no forced entry. That made us special, lucky in the worst possible way. After they left, Vanessa and I didn't sleep that night. We pushed our dresser against the bedroom door, kept every light in the house on, and just sat up talking through every scenario we could think of. Around 3 in the morning, I remembered something that made my skin go cold. When we first moved in 2 years ago, our landlord had mentioned that the previous tenant had left suddenly, something about a bad breakup, and there'd been some confusion about whether all the keys had been returned. At the time, I hadn't thought much of it, but now it felt significant. The next morning, exhausted and paranoid, I called a locksmith before I even had coffee. The guy came out that same day and changed every single lock on the house. Front door, back door, even the side gate. Cost us almost $400, but I didn't care. We also called Vanessa's sister and Austin to verify they still had their keys or had returned them, and both confirmed they did. Austin even drove over that afternoon to physically show me the key, which I'd completely forgotten I'd gotten back from him, and had hung on our key rack. The landlord was harder to reach, but when I finally got him on the phone, he admitted he'd had 6 copies of the house key at one point, and couldn't account for where all of them were now. That was infuriating, but also oddly relieving. At least we had a likely explanation. We never found out who that guy was. The police never caught him, and honestly, I don't think they tried that hard. No one was hurt, nothing irreplaceable was taken since he dropped the backpack when he ran, and they had bigger cases to worry about. Vanessa and I ended up breaking our lease 3 months later and moving to an apartment complex with actual security, cameras in the hallways, the whole deal. We both agreed we couldn't stay in that house, not after knowing someone had sat in our guest room in the dark, eating candy and listening to us live our lives just on the other side of a door. The thing that still bothers me, even now, isn't the theft or even the danger we were potentially in. It's that image of the chair pulled up facing the door, all those wrappers around it, and the realization that he'd been there long enough to get comfortable. He wasn't in a hurry. He wasn't panicked. He was just waiting, and if we'd come home even 30 minutes earlier, or if he'd decided to walk out of that room instead of hiding, I don't know what would have happened. Sometimes I wonder if it really was just a random guy who'd gotten hold of an old key, or if it was the previous tenant who'd never really left us alone. Either way, I check every lock twice now, every single night, and I probably always will. Halloween used to be my favorite holiday. I'm talking full-on obsessed, planning costumes in August, mapping out the best candy routes, the whole deal. I was 14 in October 2015, living with my mom and younger brother in a suburb outside Portland, Oregon. Our street, Oakmont Drive, was one of those picture-perfect neighborhoods where people actually knew each other's names and borrowed lawn equipment. Every house went all out for Halloween. Carved pumpkins, fake cobwebs, those inflatable ghosts that looked ridiculous in daylight. Except for one house. Number 447, about 5 doors down from us. A single-story ranch with faded blue siding, belonging to a guy everyone just called Mr. Henley. He'd lived there longer than anyone could remember, kept to himself, never caused problems. But here's the weird part. Every single Halloween, without fail, he'd decorate his front porch. Not elaborate stuff, just a couple of carved pumpkins, some orange lights, a wreath on the door. Made it look like he was participating. But if you actually walked up those steps and knocked, nothing. Complete silence. The lights would be on inside, you could see the flicker of a TV through the curtains, but he never, ever answered the door. Most kids learned to skip his house after the first year of trying. It became this unspoken thing in the neighborhood. You'd see groups of trick-or-treaters walk right past 447 without even slowing down. But it always bugged me, you know? Why decorate if you're not going to hand out candy? Why make your house look inviting and then ignore everyone? My friend Troy, this scrawny kid with red hair who lived for causing trouble, had this theory that Mr. Henley was doing it on purpose, like some psychological experiment to mess with people. Troy's older brother Dylan was 17, had his license, and thought he was hot shit because he could grow a patchy beard. That October, Dylan decided he was going to teach the old creep a lesson for being antisocial. He recruited Troy, me, and this girl Amber from our grade who had a reputation for being fearless. The plan was simple, stupid teenager stuff. We'd go to Mr. Henley's house on Halloween night, TP his trees, maybe smash a pumpkin, ring the doorbell a bunch of times, and run. Classic prank, nothing crazy. I remember feeling uneasy about it even then, but I didn't want to look like a coward in front of everyone, especially Amber. So I agreed. Halloween night came with that perfect autumn chill in the air. Our neighborhood was packed. Families everywhere, little kids in princess costumes holding their parents' hands, teenagers in lazy last-minute outfits. Dylan picked us up around 8:30 in his beat-up Jeep Cherokee, after most of the young trick-or-treaters had gone home. Troy was practically vibrating with excitement in the passenger seat, kept going on about how this was going to be legendary. Amber sat in the back with me, checking her phone, looking bored but game for whatever. We parked 2 streets over and walked, carrying rolls of toilet paper stuffed in our jacket pockets. The closer we got to Oakmont Drive, the quieter it became. Most porch lights were turning off, the Halloween energy dying down for the night. When we reached Mr. Henley's house, I noticed the decorations looked exactly the same as every other year. 2 jack-o'-lanterns on the porch steps, their triangle eyes glowing from the candles inside, orange string lights outlining the doorframe. His living room light was on, and through the sheer curtains, I could see the blue glow of his television. Everything looked normal, peaceful even. That's what made what Dylan said next feel so out of place. "Check it out," Dylan whispered, pointing to the roof edge above the porch. At first, I didn't see what he meant. Then Amber spotted it too. A small black object mounted under the eave, angled down toward the walkway. "Is that a camera?" she asked. We all stared at it for a second. It was definitely a camera, one of those compact security ones, and it was pointed directly at the sidewalk and front path. "Paranoid old bastard," Dylan muttered, but he was grinning like it made the whole thing more exciting. Troy suggested we do the prank from the side yard instead, away from the camera's view. We crept around to the right side of the house, where a tall wooden fence separated Mr. Henley's property from his neighbors. The area was darker here, just a small side window with the blinds drawn and a motion sensor light that thankfully didn't trigger. Dylan started unrolling toilet paper, getting ready to toss it over the fence into the front yard trees. That's when Troy noticed something that made him grab my arm hard enough to hurt. "Dude," he hissed, "there's another one." He was pointing at the corner of the house near the foundation. Another camera, smaller than the first, tucked into the shadow where the siding met the concrete. This one was aimed along the side of the house, covering the exact area where we were standing. My stomach twisted. Why would someone need cameras on the side of their house? Dylan tried to play it cool, said lots of people have security systems, but his voice had lost that cocky edge. Amber wanted to leave. She kept saying this was creepy and we should just go, but Troy, stubborn as always, said we'd come this far and weren't going to chicken out over some cameras. He started moving toward the back of the house, staying close to the wall, and like idiots, we followed. The backyard was small and enclosed by that same wooden fence, with a concrete patio and a rusted barbecue grill that looked like it hadn't been used in years. A sliding glass door led into what I assumed was the kitchen, and next to it was a regular door with a small window at the top. Everything was dark back there except for one thing. Mounted on the back corner of the house, pointed at the yard, was a third camera, and this one had a little red light blinking on it. Troy saw it the same time I did. Nobody said anything for a moment. We just stood there in this guy's backyard, realizing that every single angle of his property was being recorded. That's when Dylan, trying to salvage his tough guy image, did the dumbest thing possible. He walked right up to the back door and knocked. Loud. The sound echoed in the quiet night. We all tensed up, waiting for Mr. Henley to flip on the porch light or yell at us to get lost. But nothing happened. Dylan knocked again, harder this time. The kind of aggressive banging that would wake up anyone inside. Still nothing. "He's definitely home," Amber whispered, pointing at the TV light still visible through the front windows. We could even hear it faintly, the muffled sound of voices from whatever show was playing. Dylan tried the door handle, locked, obviously. Then he cupped his hands around his face and peered through the small window at the top of the door. He went completely still. "What?" Troy asked. "What do you see?" Dylan didn't answer right away. When he finally stepped back, his face looked pale even in the darkness. "There's papers," he said quietly. "Like, everywhere, covering the walls." Before anyone could process that, Troy shoved past him and looked through the window himself. "Holy shit," he breathed. "It's all printouts. Photos, I think." I didn't want to look. Every instinct was screaming at me to get out of there, to go home. Forget this whole stupid night. But curiosity is a terrible thing. I stepped up and pressed my face to the cold glass. The kitchen was dim, lit only by the glow spilling in from another room, but I could see enough. The walls were absolutely plastered with printed photographs, hundreds of them, maybe thousands, overlapping each other like scales on a fish. They covered every visible surface, taped up in this obsessive collage that made my brain hurt to look at. From what I could make out, they were pictures of the street. Our street, different times of day, different seasons. I recognized Mrs. Palmer's garden from last spring, the Johnsons' car that they'd sold months ago, and people. Kids walking to the bus stop, parents pushing strollers, teenagers on bikes, all taken from a distance like surveillance photos. My eyes landed on one image that was closer than the others, clearer. It showed 3 kids in Halloween costumes from what looked like last year, a vampire, a witch, and a skeleton. They were walking right past Mr. Henley's house, probably on their way to better candy spots. The photo was zoomed in enough that you could see their faces clearly. I recognized the vampire. It was Troy's little sister, Kayla. She'd been 9 last Halloween. "We need to call the cops," Amber said, and her voice was shaking now. She had her phone out already. But before she could dial, we heard it. A sound from inside the house. Not footsteps exactly, more like something being dragged across the floor. Heavy and slow. We all backed away from the door at the same time. Troy grabbed Dylan's arm and started pulling him toward the side of the house, toward the way we'd come in. That's when I noticed Dylan was staring at something. "Where's Troy?" he said. It took a second for the words to make sense. I turned around. Troy was right there next to Dylan. He'd just been pulling on his arm. But Dylan wasn't looking at Troy. He was looking past us, at the back fence. "Not Troy," Dylan said, his voice weird and flat. "The other kid, the one who was just standing by the grill." Ice flooded my veins. There had been 4 of us, me, Dylan, Troy, and Amber. Nobody else. "What are you talking about?" Amber demanded. But she was looking around now too, her phone's flashlight swinging wildly. Dylan insisted he'd seen someone, a shorter figure in dark clothes, standing by the barbecue grill when we were all looking through the window. He'd assumed it was one of us who'd wandered off. We tore out of that backyard like our lives depended on it. I slammed my shin against the corner of the fence gate so hard I saw stars, but I didn't stop running. We didn't stop until we reached Dylan's Jeep 2 streets away, all of us gasping for air, checking and rechecking that it was just the 4 of us. Dylan kept insisting he'd seen someone, describing a person maybe 5 feet tall, wearing a dark hoodie. Troy called him paranoid, said it was just shadows and he'd freaked himself out. But I'd seen Dylan's face in that moment. He wasn't the type to scare easy, and he'd looked genuinely confused, like his brain couldn't make sense of what his eyes had seen. We sat in the Jeep for almost 20 minutes arguing about what to do. Amber wanted to call the police immediately and tell them about the cameras and the photos. Troy was worried we'd get in trouble for trespassing. Dylan had gone quiet, just gripping the steering wheel and staring out the windshield. Finally, I convinced them we should at least tell our parents. Let them handle it like adults. We agreed to go home, and tomorrow we'd figure out the right way to report what we'd seen. Dylan dropped everyone off. When I got home, my mom was watching TV in the living room. I almost told her everything right then, but the words stuck in my throat. How do you explain that you were trying to vandalize someone's house and discovered something way worse? I barely slept that night. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw those photos layered on top of each other. All those unsuspecting people going about their lives while being documented. The next morning, a Wednesday, my mom woke me up early. Her face was serious in a way that made my chest tighten. "Did you see Troy last night?" she asked. I told her, yeah, we'd all hung out for Halloween. She sat down on my bed and took a breath. "His mom just called. He never came home last night." The room started spinning. I told her that couldn't be right. Dylan had dropped Troy off at his house around 10:30, same as the rest of us. My mom said Troy's mom had been up waiting, and he never walked through the door. His phone was going straight to voicemail. They'd already called the police. I got dressed in a blur, and my mom drove me to Troy's house, where there were already 2 police cars parked outside. Troy's parents looked distraught, his mom crying on the porch while his dad talked to the officers. They asked me questions. When did I last see him? Did he mention going anywhere else? Did he seem upset or different? I told them everything I could without mentioning where we'd actually been. Said we were just walking around the neighborhood. One of the officers wrote everything down in a little notepad, his face professionally neutral, asking if Troy had any problems at home or school, the standard runaway questions. By that afternoon, I couldn't take it anymore. I called Amber and told her we needed to tell someone about Mr. Henley's house, about what we'd seen. She'd been thinking the same thing. We decided to tell her older sister, who was 22 and worked as a paralegal, someone who'd know how to handle it properly. When we explained everything to her, showing her exactly where the house was on Oakmont Drive, her expression turned grim. She didn't yell at us for trespassing. She just made us repeat every detail twice, then immediately called a detective hotline she had saved in her phone from her work. Within an hour, there were 6 police cars on our street. I watched from my bedroom window as officers surrounded Mr. Henley's house, knocking on the door with that official police knock. When he didn't answer, they went around back. I couldn't see what happened next, but within 30 minutes, they were bringing Mr. Henley out in handcuffs. He was smaller than I'd imagined, balding, wearing a cardigan that made him look like somebody's retired grandfather. He wasn't fighting or yelling. He just looked resigned, like he'd been expecting this day to come eventually. More police showed up. They started carrying boxes out of the house. Computer equipment, hard drives, file folders. The whole street came out to watch. Nobody could believe it. Mr. Henley, the quiet neighbor who kept to himself, was being arrested right in front of everyone. The full story came out over the next few days, pieced together from news reports and neighborhood gossip. Police found over 30 cameras hidden around Mr. Henley's property and inside his house, all pointed at the street and sidewalks. His computer contained thousands upon thousands of photos and videos of children from the neighborhood, organized into folders by name, age, and physical description. He'd been doing this for at least 8 years, maybe longer. The cameras had motion sensors. They'd activate whenever someone walked by. He had footage of kids waiting for the school bus, playing in yards, riding bikes. Nothing explicitly illegal in terms of the footage itself, since it was all taken from his property of public spaces. But the scope and obsessive nature of the collection was enough for charges related to stalking and endangering minors. They found detailed notes about routines, favorite colors, names of friends. It was a surveillance operation that would have made intelligence agencies jealous. But here's the thing that still haunts me. They found Troy. Not at Mr. Henley's house, and that's what made it so much worse in a way. Troy had apparently panicked after Dylan dropped him off, couldn't stop thinking about those photos and that figure Dylan claimed to see. Instead of going inside his house, he'd walked back to Oakmont Drive by himself, planning to watch Mr. Henley's house from a distance to see if anything suspicious happened. A neighbor 2 doors down from Mr. Henley had a security camera, and it caught Troy standing across the street around 11 p.m. just watching the house. What the camera also caught, about 15 minutes later, was a van pulling up. Not Mr. Henley's vehicle, something else entirely. A white contractor van with no plates visible. 2 men got out. They walked straight toward Troy. The footage was grainy and taken from an angle, but you could see Troy backing away, then the men moving faster, and then Troy was just gone. The van drove off. Police traced the van through other neighborhood cameras and traffic footage. It led them to a house in Vancouver, Washington, about 20 miles away. What they found there was worse than anything at Mr. Henley's place. Turns out Mr. Henley wasn't working alone. He was part of a network, and his role was surveillance, identifying targets, documenting patterns, providing information to others who did the actual abductions. The house in Vancouver was where they brought the kids. I can't write the details of what happened in that place. I still have nightmares about what the news reports implied. They found Troy there, along with 2 other children who'd been missing from different counties. Troy had been there less than 24 hours when police raided the location. He was physically okay, traumatized beyond belief, but alive. The timing of our discovery and report had literally saved his life. If we'd waited even one more day to tell someone, the outcome would have been different. 7 people were arrested in total, including Mr. Henley. The trial was massive, made national news for a while. Mr. Henley took a plea deal and got 40 years. The others got more. Troy moved away with his family about 6 months later. Couldn't handle living on that street anymore, knowing that his every movement had been cataloged for years by someone living 5 houses down. I don't blame him. I moved away too for college and never went back except to visit my mom. She sold that house in 2023. Sometimes I think about how many times I walked past Mr. Henley's place as a kid, completely oblivious. How many times I was photographed, filed away, studied. The police said we were lucky that Mr. Henley's role was just observation, that he personally never hurt anyone, just enabled others to do so. But that doesn't make it better. He sat in that house for years, watching children, knowing exactly what his information would be used for. The decorations on Halloween were bait, a test to see which kids would come to his door, get close enough for clear facial shots. That's why he never answered. He didn't want candy-seeking trick-or-treaters. He wanted footage. The figure Dylan saw in the backyard that night? Police think it might have been one of Mr. Henley's associates, checking on something, maybe even watching us while we discovered the cameras. We'll never know for sure, and honestly, I don't want to know. What I do know is that Halloween will never feel the same. Every decorated house, every porch light, every neighbor I don't quite recognize, it all carries this weight now. Trust is a fragile thing. Sometimes the monsters don't hide in the shadows. Sometimes they live 5 doors down and wave politely when you check the mail. November 1st, 2023 started like any other morning after Halloween, except I couldn't stop thinking about what happened the night before. I'm 17, a senior at Lincoln High in Pennsylvania, and I'd been looking forward to having the house to myself for once. Mom and Dad had this wedding to go to in Philadelphia, some second cousin I'd never met, and they'd be gone until late. They kept asking if I wanted them to stay, if I'd be okay alone on Halloween night. But honestly, I was thrilled. No parents meant I could game with my buddies online, order whatever food I wanted, and not deal with handing out candy to screaming kids all night. I'd been working part-time at Best Buy after school, saving up for a car, and I was exhausted. A quiet night in sounded perfect. Our neighborhood in Harrisburg wasn't exactly the trick-or-treating capital anyway. Most families drove their kids to the newer developments where the houses were closer together. We lived on Belmont Road, where the properties had these long driveways and the houses sat far back from the street. Perfect for privacy, perfect for what I thought would be a peaceful evening. Around 7:30, just as it was getting dark, the first knock came. I was in the middle of a raid in Destiny 2, headset on, completely zoned into the game. The knock was loud enough that I heard it through my headphones, which annoyed me because I was about to take down a boss. I muted my mic and yelled, "We're not doing candy this year," toward the front door, not even bothering to get up. My character died because I wasn't paying attention, and I cursed under my breath. The knocking came again, harder this time, more insistent. I pulled off my headset and actually listened. It was this weird rhythm, 3 quick knocks, pause, 2 slow ones. Not the usual excited kid knock. Something about it felt deliberate, almost like a code. I pushed back from my desk in the living room where I'd set up my gaming station and walked to the front hallway. Our house has this long entrance with the door at the end, and there's a small window beside it. But the porch light was off because, well, we weren't participating. Through the frosted glass panel, I could see shapes, 2, maybe 3 people standing there. They were wearing masks, looked like adults based on their height. I figured maybe older kids, high schoolers trying to score free candy. I didn't open the door. Instead, I called out through it, "Sorry, we're not handing out candy tonight." My voice came out stronger than I felt, trying to sound authoritative like my dad does when he wants solicitors to leave. There was this long pause, maybe 10 seconds of complete silence, and I thought they'd left. Then I heard it. A woman's voice, muffled through the door, sweet and friendly. "Oh, we're not trick-or-treating, honey. We're from the house across the street, the Buchanans. We're collecting donations for the community center's Halloween fund. Just a few dollars if you can spare it." I didn't know anyone named Buchanan, and I'd lived here my whole life. The house directly across from ours had been empty for 3 months since old Mr. Garrett died. His kids were still fighting over the estate or something. My mom had mentioned it. I stood there, hand on the doorknob, feeling this weird tension in my chest. The smart thing would have been to just say no thanks and walk away. But I felt rude, you know? Like maybe they were new neighbors I hadn't met yet, and I didn't want to be that jerk teenager who slammed the door on people trying to do something nice for the community. I don't really have any cash on me," I said through the door, which was true. I had maybe $6 in my wallet upstairs. "Maybe you could come back when my parents are home?" The woman's voice came again, and this time something about it sounded different, less friendly, more practiced, like she was reading from a script. "That's okay, sweetie. Do you have Venmo? We can do it digitally. Or we're also just passing out these flyers about the event. Could you just open the door real quick so I can hand you one?" Every instinct I had suddenly screamed no. My girlfriend Veronica, we'd been dating for 8 months. She was always joking about how I was too trusting, how I'd probably let a serial killer in if they asked politely enough. I remembered her saying that, and actually took a step back from the door. "You know what? I'm actually not supposed to open the door when my parents aren't home," I said, trying to keep my voice casual. "But thanks anyway." The silence that followed was heavy, uncomfortable. I could see the shapes through the frosted glass, and they weren't moving, just standing there. Then came that same knock pattern again, 3 quick, 2 slow, but harder this time, almost aggressive. The whole door shook with it. My heart started pounding in a way that made my ears ring. I backed up further into the hallway, putting more distance between me and that door. "I really can't help you tonight," I shouted, my voice cracking a bit on the last word. I hated how scared I sounded. Through the window, I watched the shapes finally move. They turned away from the door, and I could see them walking down our porch steps. Relief flooded through me so fast I actually felt dizzy. See? Just persistent fundraisers or whatever. Annoying but harmless. I laughed at myself a little, feeling stupid for getting so worked up. I went back to my gaming setup, put my headset back on, and rejoined my buddies in the chat. "Dude, where'd you go?" my friend Carlos asked. "Had some weirdos at the door," I said, trying to sound casual about it. "Halloween brings out all the crazies." We played for another hour, and I'd mostly forgotten about the whole thing. Around 9 o'clock, I ordered a pizza, pepperoni and jalapeno, something Mom would never let me get because she says it's too greasy. I was paying online when I heard it again. That knock. 3 quick, 2 slow. I ripped off my headset so fast it clattered onto my desk. The knocking continued, patient and rhythmic, like whoever was out there had all the time in the world. This time I was angry more than scared. What part of no did these people not understand? I marched to the front door, ready to be way less polite, and looked through the peephole we had installed up high. 3 people stood on my porch, all wearing those cheap rubber masks you get at Spirit Halloween, a werewolf, a zombie, and what looked like a screaming ghost face. They were all facing the door, perfectly still, like they were posing for a photo. All 3 were definitely adults, broad shoulders, tall, wearing dark clothes that weren't costumes. Something about the way they stood there, not fidgeting or talking to each other, made my anger evaporate instantly. Normal people don't stand that still. "We're still collecting for the community center." The woman's voice came again, but this time she wasn't even trying to sound friendly. It was flat, almost bored. "We know you're alone in there. Your parents won't be back until late." My entire body went rigid. How did they know that? How did they know my parents were gone? I definitely hadn't told them that detail. I stepped away from the door as quietly as possible, my socks silent on the hardwood floor. My phone was still on my desk in the living room. I needed to call 911 or my parents or someone. But as I turned to head back, I heard something that made me stop breathing. Footsteps, not on the porch. These were moving around the side of the house, deliberate, crunching through the leaves my dad had been too lazy to rake last weekend. They were circling the house. I crept toward the living room window that faced our driveway and carefully pulled back just the edge of the curtain. The werewolf mask was peering into my dad's office window on the side of the house, hands cupped around the face to see inside better. The person was trying the window, jiggling it gently to test if it was locked. My dad was paranoid about that stuff. But watching someone actually try to break into your house while you're inside is a completely different level of terror than anything I'd ever experienced. My legs felt weak, like they might just give out. I let the curtain fall back and basically crawled to my desk, grabbed my phone with shaking fingers, and dialed 911. 911, what's your emergency? The dispatcher's voice was calm, professional, and hearing another human voice almost made me cry with relief. "There are people trying to break into my house," I whispered, crouching down behind my desk like that would somehow protect me. "I'm home alone, and they keep knocking, and now they're checking the windows." The dispatcher asked for my address and I gave it, my voice barely above a whisper. "Are they armed? Can you see weapons?" she asked. I hadn't even thought to check for weapons. The idea made my throat close up. "I don't know. They're wearing masks, Halloween masks. There's 3 of them, maybe more." She told me to stay on the line, that officers were being dispatched and were about 8 minutes away. 8 minutes. That felt like an eternity. She kept talking to me, asking questions. Was I in a room with a lock? Did I know these people? Had they said anything threatening? I answered automatically, my brain only half processing what I was saying. The knocking had stopped. That somehow felt worse than when they were pounding on the door. At least then I knew where they were. Now the house was completely silent except for my ragged breathing and the tinny sound of the dispatcher's voice. Then I heard it, a scraping sound, metal on metal, coming from the back of the house, the kitchen door. We had this old sliding glass door that led to our deck, and the lock on it had always been kind of loose. "They're trying to get in through the back," I hissed into the phone, scrambling to my feet. The dispatcher's voice got more urgent. "Is there a room you can lock yourself in? Preferably with only one entry point?" My parents' bedroom had a lock on the door and it was upstairs, away from both entry points. I ran for the stairs, taking them 2 at a time, my heart hammering so hard I thought it might actually burst. Behind me, I heard glass breaking, not shattering, but that distinct crack of glass giving way, followed by the screech of the sliding door being forced open on its track. They were inside. They were actually inside my house. I got to my parents' room, slammed the door shut, and turned the lock. It was one of those flimsy privacy locks, not a deadbolt, the kind a decent kick could probably break through. I pushed their heavy dresser in front of the door, adrenaline making me strong enough to move it by myself, even though it usually took both my parents. The dispatcher was still talking, telling me the police were 6 minutes out, telling me to stay quiet, to stay hidden. I could hear voices downstairs now, casual conversation like they were guests at a party, male voices discussing something I couldn't make out. What happened next still makes me sick to think about. I heard footsteps moving through our house, not rushing, not searching frantically, but methodical. Drawers opening and closing in my dad's office. The sound of our TV being unplugged, I recognized that specific pop the speakers made. They were robbing us. Just casually looting our home while I hid upstairs like a scared kid. I heard one of them laugh at something, this normal, everyday laugh that made the whole thing feel surreal. How could someone break into a house, knowing someone was home, and just laugh about it? Then the footsteps started coming up the stairs, slow, deliberate steps on our creaky staircase. I pressed myself against the far wall of my parents' room, clutching my phone so tight my knuckles ached. The dispatcher was whispering now, as if they could somehow hear her through my phone. Police are 3 minutes away. Stay absolutely quiet. Don't engage with them. One of them tried the handle of the guest bathroom. Then my bedroom door. I heard it swing open, heard someone walking around in there. My gaming setup that I'd spent months saving for. My laptop. My collection of vintage band posters that Veronica had gotten me for my birthday. They were trashing my space, going through my stuff. Finally, footsteps stopped right outside my parents' door. The handle jiggled, once, twice. Then a man's voice, calm and almost friendly. "Hey kid, we know you called the cops. They're not gonna get here in time. Just stay in there and keep quiet and nobody gets hurt. We're just here for the valuables." I couldn't even respond. My throat had completely closed up. I just stood there, pressed against the wall, praying that dresser would hold if they decided to force the door. But they didn't. After a few seconds of silence, I heard them move away, back down the stairs. More sounds of things being moved, collected. A crash that sounded like our china cabinet in the dining room. Mom's grandmother's dishes that she only brought out for Thanksgiving. I wanted to scream at them, tell them to leave that alone, but I bit down on my own hand to stay silent. The dispatcher kept whispering encouragement, telling me I was doing great. That help was almost there. Then, like someone had flipped a switch, I heard rapid movement downstairs. Footsteps running toward the back of the house, car doors slamming outside, an engine starting. They were leaving. Through my parents' window, I saw a dark van, one of those old cargo vans with no windows in the back, peeling out of our driveway so fast the tires squealed. Maybe 30 seconds later, I heard the most beautiful sound of my life. Sirens. Multiple sirens getting closer. Red and blue lights flashed through the window, painting the walls of the bedroom in alternating colors. The police found me still barricaded in my parents' room, still on the phone with dispatch, shaking so badly I could barely push the dresser away from the door to let them in. There were 4 officers, and they cleared the whole house before they'd let me come out. The place was destroyed. They'd taken our TV, my dad's expensive camera equipment, Mom's jewelry box from their bedroom, my gaming laptop, even the spare car keys we kept in the kitchen drawer. The sliding glass door was completely shattered, glass everywhere across the kitchen floor. But what really got me was the front door. It was standing wide open, swinging slightly in the night breeze. They'd unlocked it from the inside and left it open, like they were making a point. Like they wanted me to know how easy it had been. One of the officers, this older guy with gray in his beard named Officer Paulson, sat with me on the couch while they processed the scene. He explained that there'd been a string of burglaries in surrounding neighborhoods over the past 2 months, all on Halloween night. Groups of 2 to 4 adults, dressed like trick-or-treaters or fundraisers, would knock on doors to see if anyone was home. If someone answered, they'd make an excuse and leave. If no one answered, or if they could tell it was just a kid home alone, they'd force entry. They'd hit 6 houses that night alone before getting to ours. I was the first person who'd actually called the cops while they were still inside. My parents got home around 11, while the police were still there taking statements and dusting for fingerprints. Mom completely broke down when she saw the house. and Dad just kept hugging me saying, "You did everything right, you did everything right," over and over. The weird thing is, they caught the group 2 weeks later. Turned out they were operating out of a rental property in Mechanicsburg, about 20 minutes away. 4 people total, 3 men and 1 woman, all in their 30s and 40s, all with prior records. They'd been doing this for years apparently, moving from state to state and hitting suburbs during holidays when people were distracted and homes were empty. The cops recovered some of our stuff from a storage unit they'd rented, though my laptop was already sold. The thing that still messes with me isn't even the robbery itself, it's how normal they sounded. That casual laugh, the friendly voice at the door, the guy calmly telling me to stay quiet. They'd done this so many times it was just routine for them, like they were working a regular job. Sometimes I still hear that knock pattern in my head. 3 quick, 2 slow, and my whole body tenses up. We moved to a different house 6 months later. Mom and Dad said it was because they wanted to downsize, but I know the real reason. None of us could feel safe there anymore. I still can't stay home alone at night, even now. Veronica thinks I should talk to someone about it, and she's probably right. But honestly, posting this here helps. Just getting it out there, you know. If you're ever home alone and something feels wrong, trust that feeling. Don't worry about being rude or paranoid. Just lock the doors, call the cops, and don't open that door for anyone. People always talk about Halloween like it's harmless. Costumes, candy, and too much sugar before bedtime. That night started exactly like that for me and my best friend Lucas. We were both 13, still trying to pretend we weren't too old to go door to door. Our neighborhood in Cedar Hills was calm, all trimmed lawns and pumpkin lights. My mom had given us one rule before we left. Only wrapped candy, okay? Of course, we nodded and ignored it the second we were out of sight. We'd been walking for maybe an hour when we noticed a porch that looked different. No plastic skeletons, no lights. Just a single orange candle flickering on a wooden table by the door. An old woman stepped out as we got close. She had snow-white hair tied in a bun and wore a knitted shawl with tiny black cats embroidered along the edges. "Evening, boys," she said with this soft, tired voice. "You're my first trick-or-treaters tonight." She smiled and handed us small foil-wrapped brownies, still warm. "Homemade," she added proudly. Lucas grinned and said thank you before I could even think twice. We didn't open them right away. The foil was a little greasy, and they smelled like cinnamon and cocoa. It felt almost too personal, like something your grandma would give you, not a stranger. Lucas said his aunt used to bake brownies like that, and he tore his open, took a bite, and laughed. "See? Perfectly fine." I remember hesitating, the warmth seeping through the foil into my palm. I told myself it would be rude not to at least try. So I ate half of mine while we kept walking toward the next house. About 2 hours later, I started feeling heavy, like every step was through mud. Lucas joked that maybe we'd just eaten too much candy, but his words slurred a little. I remember standing in front of a house with inflatable ghosts when the world tilted sideways. The lights stretched, the sounds of kids laughing faded, and I couldn't tell if I was still standing or on the ground. I heard Lucas mumbling something, but it sounded far away, like underwater. After that, everything went black. When I came to, I was lying on my bedroom floor. My mom was hovering over me, panicked, holding the phone to her ear. My mouth was dry and I could barely keep my eyes open. She said she'd found me collapsed near the front door when she got back from her shift. I tried to ask about Lucas, but my voice barely came out. She didn't even realize I'd gone out trick-or-treating alone. She thought he was home by then. That's when I saw the crumpled piece of foil on the floor beside me, and it hit me like a puzzle snapping together. The next morning, my mom told me Lucas had been taken to the hospital. His parents found him unconscious too in his driveway. The doctors said we were lucky. Whatever we'd eaten had been dosed with a strong sedative. Police came to ask questions, and I remember sitting on the couch trying to recall every detail about that woman's house. The candle, the shawl with the cats, the way she'd said, "You're my first trick-or-treaters tonight." I told them everything I could think of, but the more I talked, the more it felt like the edges of that memory were smudged. 2 officers drove around the block with my mom and me that afternoon. Every house looked normal. Plastic pumpkins, fake cobwebs, all the usual stuff. But when we got to the spot where I swore the old lady's house had been, there was nothing. Just an empty lot with overgrown weeds and a "for sale" sign half buried in dirt. The officer asked if I was sure, and I pointed to where the candle had been, the porch steps, everything. He just looked at me like he didn't want to say what he was thinking. That night, I couldn't sleep. My head throbbed, and I kept replaying the moment she handed us the brownies. I could still smell them, warm chocolate and cinnamon. I could even hear the faint clink of her bracelets as she moved. Around midnight, I heard footsteps outside my window. Slow, deliberate, crunching through leaves. I told myself it was a raccoon, but the steps stopped right beneath my window, and a shadow passed across the curtain. Tall but hunched. I waited, holding my breath, until it moved away toward the street. The following morning, police cars were parked down the street again. They'd found something behind the empty lot, a cellar entrance hidden beneath rotted boards. Inside, there were shelves stacked with baking ingredients, dozens of foil-wrapped brownies, and children's costumes. One of the detectives told my mom quietly that there were also blankets, a lantern, and a small radio tuned to static. No one lived there, not anymore. The house had burned down years earlier after a gas leak. That lot had been empty ever since. When they showed me photos from the cellar, one detail hit me hard. On one of the shelves was a folded shawl with embroidered black cats, exactly like the one the woman wore. The detective said they were still testing fingerprints, but his expression told me they didn't expect to find anything living down there. Lucas and I were told we'd probably ingested just enough to knock us out, not enough to kill us. Whoever or whatever that woman was, she'd planned for a much longer night. A week later, the neighborhood was back to normal. Decorations came down, kids were back in school, and adults talked about it like some urban legend that had gotten out of hand. But I couldn't walk past that lot without feeling a chill. The candle table was gone, but the grass where it once stood never grew back. It stayed like a dark patch in the dirt, perfectly round, as if scorched. Every time I saw it, I swore I could smell that same mix of chocolate and cinnamon lingering in the air. It's been years now, and Halloween still makes me uneasy. I don't touch anything homemade, not even from people I trust. Sometimes, when the porch lights start flickering at night, I remember her voice, soft, almost motherly, telling us we were her first trick-or-treaters. My mom says trauma can play tricks on memory, that maybe I misremembered parts of that night. But I know what I saw. I know what I tasted. And I know that somewhere out there, someone else might still be handing out those same warm, foil-wrapped brownies.